Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto wants nothing to do with Jiraiya part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. October 10th, Konohagakure no Sato. Hiruzen Sarutobi felt the weight of each of his 55 years as he stared down at the small bundle in his arms. Naruto, what kind of life will you live? The aged Kage wondered before frowning regretfully. Such a heavy burden should not fall to one so young. Wasn't that why we built the hidden villages, sensei? So children could be children? Still lost in his thoughts, he moved aside a portion of the blanket to gaze at the seal upon the infant's stomach. What an unbelievable seal array, Minato, you truly were a genius. Not for the first time that night, he was beset by guilt and regret. Such a talented and promising man shouldn't have died so young. Especially not when an old man such as himself could have easily died in his place. Why, Minato? Why didn't you have me perform the sealing? Especially when your Hiraishin made it so I was literally an instant away. He sighed tiredly as he looked away from the child and out over the village of Konoha. It was only one of the mysteries surrounding recent events. Not 2 days ago, the mighty Kyuubi no Kitsune, a creature so powerful it was more a natural disaster than a fox, had driven the village to the brink of destruction. Nothing the shinobi of mighty Konoha tried had been able to stop the great beast. In fact, Sarutobi knew that the only reason the ninja had managed to stall the great fox at all was that the Kyuubi had been having too much fun butchering them. He shivered as he thought of the slaughter that had been unleashed on the shinobi of his village. He had seen entire wars that were less brutal. Even more disturbing was that despite witnessing their final moments himself, neither Sarutobi nor anyone else alive knew what the hell had caused the attack. The Kyuubi was supposed to be safely contained within Kushina, and the Yondaime himself was ensuring the Bijou didn't escape while Kushina was giving birth. They'd even left the village in secret to do so, and yet somehow the Kyuubi had not only escaped, it had appeared right in the heart of Konoha. Shaking off the troubling thoughts, he looked down at Naruto once again, sighing quietly in frustration while being careful not to awaken the sleeping child. It had been a difficult decision to inform the council of Naruto and his burden, a decision that he was already regretting. Given the choice, Sarutobi would have much preferred to keep everything about Naruto a secret, but he had been Hokage too long not to be wary of the consequences of others learning of Naruto on their own and jumping to conclusions, especially Danzo. There was no telling how badly people would react to that, especially if something happened to Sarutobi, who wasn't a young man anymore. So informing the council, if only as a precaution, seemed to be the best option at the time. Though, he thought bitterly, it's hard to imagine a reaction worse than the one from the council. Flashback. Looking around the room, Sarutobi took in the various members that made up both sides of the council. First off, there were 2 of the 3 village elders, his former teammates Koharu Udatane and Hamera Midokado. The final elder was Danzo, his old friend and rival for the title of Sandaime Hokage and the leader of the supposedly disbanded Root Anbu program. I'll have to be careful with him here, he reminded himself. Danzo will be quick to try to gain access to Naruto, and he's never been above disobeying me if he believed it was necessary for the betterment of Konoha. Then there were the heads of the more powerful and influential clans, to include the 4 noble clans. Fugaku Uchiha, head of the noble Uchiha clan as well as the commander of the Konoha military police, was sitting with his arms crossed between Inoichi and a stony-faced Sum. Inoichi was the head of the Yamanaka clan and a member of the infamous Ino Shikacho trio, possibly the most famous team from Konoha since the Sannin. Sum was sitting in as the acting head of the Inuzuka clan since her mother-in-law had been killed, and her husband Tairo had taken crippling injuries fighting off the Kyuubi. Sitting to Inoichi's left were Shikaku and Shuza, the heads of the Nara and noble Akimichi clans respectively. They were also the other 2 members of the Ino Shikacho trio, and semi-traditional allies of his own Sarutobi clan. Rounding out the major clans were Murakumo Karama, Hayashi Hyuga, and Shibi Aburame. With Tsunade absent, the Senju clan seat was left empty. There were also a number of minor clan heads to round out the shinobi portion of the council. Most of the individual jounin who had been members, and Sarutobi's allies only days ago were now dead, including the jounin commander. The civilian council was composed mostly of wealthy citizens and well-off merchants, though there were a handful of doctors, teachers, shop owners, and even a couple of restaurant owners as well. Their main purpose being to keep the civilian portion of Konoha from being completely forgotten by Sarutobi and his advisors. Clearing his throat, Sarutobi stood and called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know this is a painful and trying day for all of us, but we must persevere for the good of our village. Sarutobi ran his gaze over the rather simple room considering the matters that were often discussed here. Plain unadorned walls broken only by 2 double doors on opposite sides of the room, surrounded 2 long tables that ran the length of the room. There was also a smaller table sitting between the heads of the two tables that seated him and his two former teammates. As most of you are aware, the Yandane was able to defeat the Kyuubi at the cost of his own life. Seeing the various council members nodding, he continued his explanation. What none of you know is exactly how he defeated it. That got their attention. A jutsu that could kill any of the bijou, let alone the greatest of them, would be worth more than an entire country. Even if the bijou would eventually return, and at the cost of the user's life. Before they could continue down that path, Sarutobi continued, crushing some of their hopes of an ultimate jutsu. He used a forbidden technique combined with a number of fuinjutsu to seal the Kyuubi away. This also required a child to act as the prison. His last wish was that the child he chose to be the prison be seen as a hero of this village. Finishing his explanation, Sarutobi sat down and waited for the council's reaction. He had been prepared for fear, but the outright hysteria that gripped even some of the shinobi veterans on the council caught him completely off guard. Shouts of anger and even shrieks of fear came from every corner of the room, though the latter came mainly from the civilian members. Only Shibi of the noble Aburame clan remained completely calm, though it was hard to tell with him. Even the normally lazy and uncaring Shikaku, head of the Nara clan, jumped to his feet. Nearly a quarter of an hour would pass before the cacophony began to settle and order restored. The fact that Sarutobi and elders allowed this didn't appear to occur to most of those attending the meeting. For his part, Sarutobi was studying the room in an effort to salvage his own power base. Well known though the Sarutobi clan may have been prior to the founding of Konoha, living in close proximity with such clans as the Senju and Uchiha had seen their influence rapidly decline. By the time Tobirama had named Sarutobi his successor, the power and influence of Sarutobi clan had been the least of the so-called major clans. On his own, Sarutobi likely wouldn't have had the power base to be confirmed as the Sandaime, regardless of Tobirama's wishes. Oh, he was well known and respected as one of the Nidaime's students, but to the more influential clans, Hiruzen was still just a mere Sarutobi. The fact that Tobirama's own ascension hadn't exactly been smooth or unanimous certainly didn't help matters. Between his efforts to weaken the autonomy of the clans for the sake of unity, and his own well-known clashes with Madara and the Uchiha before and after Konoha's founding, Tobirama was accepted as much out of respect for Hashirama's wishes as for his own abilities. In truth, Sarutobi owed his rise to power to Danzo. Rivals or not, the man had been as loyal to Tobirama as Sarutobi had, and immediately threw his own influence behind Sarutobi's name. The Shimura clan might have been in the same boat as the Sarutobi, but Danzo's rising legend was surpassed only by Hiruzen's own. And he also had his teammates. Kagami had been an influential shinobi in a powerful September of the Uchiha clan. He'd also been loyal enough to Tobirama to blunt any opposition from the Uchiha to Sarutobi's appointment. It was Torafu Akimichi who made all the difference though. As the son of the aging head of the noble Akimichi clan, Torafu's support had been invaluable to Sarutobi's ascension as Hokage. The Akimichi brought the support of the Nara and Yamanaka, and added to the Sarutobi and Shimura clans alongside the tentative support of the Umbu and a sizable minority of the clanless. Sarutobi was able to assume power. And if Torafu had been more loyal to Danzo than to Sarutobi, or if the timing of his father's death had been oddly fortuitous, well, there was a world war raging around them, and Sarutobi had needed to know his orders were being followed. And though the first great shinobi war didn't end in Konoha's victory, Sarutobi had led Konoha well and earned a great deal of respect and loyalty in the process. From both the clans and the clanless. A respect which had grown with each passing year, until nearly all of the most influential jounin had been his allies and supporters, alongside the majority of the clanless, leaving him with a power base that was superior to any other faction in Konoha. A power base which was just gutted by the Kyuubi. Most of the younger generation had been held back from the battle with the Kyuubi, leaving the old guard to spearhead the defense and suffer the greatest casualties. Nearly all of Sarutobi's generation was dead, including Torafu, leaving Sarutobi practically back to square one. And with so many positions now vacant, the various clans would be quick to snatch up as many as they could for themselves in an effort to increase their own prestige and influence, or to prevent their rivals from doing the same. Even worse, this time Sarutobi could not count on the support of the virtually extinct Senju, the influence of Kagami, nor even the support of Danzo, as the two of them had grown increasingly distant from one another over the years as their philosophies and leadership styles diverged. Looking to the major clan heads once again, he noticed that both Shibi and Hayashi had remained sitting side by side with impassive looks on their faces as they listened to the many conversations going on around them. You know, sometimes I think those two are in some kind of competition to see who can be the most impassive. Only the single bead of sweat traveling down Hayashi's face let him know that the Hyuga was indeed worried. Shibi, on the other hand, Sarutobi couldn't begin to guess what he was thinking without getting close enough to be able to hear his bugs, as that was one of the few ways of observing an Aburame's emotions. It was only the greatest of luck that Sarutobi caught the light tapping of Hayashi's finger. A tapping that was reciprocated by Shibi. That could be very bad indeed. If the Aburame and Hyuga were to ally with each other, they could very quickly come to dominate village politics. Even the Uchiha wouldn't be able to match them on their own. Sarutobi's own block hadn't so much dominated as it had been a coalition that had its own give and take and internal power plays. But an alliance of two of the noble clans combined with the vacuum and power fluctuations caused by the loss of so many jounin could be disastrous. Despite his efforts, Tobirama had never truly been able to convince the clans to give up their own power and influence within the village, prior to his death, and Sarutobi had needed that same influence to attain the title of Hokage himself. And quite frankly, Uchiha, as the most powerful and influential of the noble clans, would likely never do so. That in turn meant the other noble clans wouldn't, which meant the lesser clans wouldn't either. Sarutobi could feel the beginnings of yet another headache as he made a mental note to try to find some way to blunt the Hyuga-Aburame alliance if it even occurred. The last thing Konoha could afford was the two noble clans attempting to seize power only for one of the other factions to retaliate. The Hyuga insurrection and Uchiha kin strife had been bad enough without any interference from outside those two clans. Sarutobi didn't want to even think of how much damage a shinobi civil war would do. From there he looked over at Shikaku, who was in a hushed conversation with Inoichi and Chuza despite scanning the room and faces of the others from time to time. Though the Nara tended to be the strategist of the trio, it was Chuza Sarutobi was most interested in. The Akimichi had been clan head for less than a week and was used to working with the Sarutobi clan and Hiruzen himself, so if he played his cards right, perhaps the Akimichi-Sarutobi alliance would endure. And given the young clan head's relative inexperience, perhaps Sarutobi could even take control of said alliance and put his own clan firmly in charge, rather than being the lesser of equals as before? Seeing Sarutobi watching, Shikaku met his eyes and nodded respectfully before turning back to his teammates. So you understand what this meeting is really about. Clever as always, Shikaku. Sarutobi understood that Shikaku's nod meant that, among other things, he knew that Sarutobi had no intention of letting the council make any real decision concerning Naruto. Oh, he'd listened to their concerns and complaints, but Sarutobi certainly didn't intend to actually agree to them. It was for that reason the Nara was conferring solely with Inoichi and Chuza, to warn them not to stand against the Hokage and to just keep their opinions to themselves. Maybe the Nara head would make a good candidate for the position of Jounin commander? That could go a long way to appeasing both the Nara and the Akimichi, paving the way for Sarutobi? It certainly helped that to the best of his knowledge, Chuza had never been informed of the exact details of his clan's alliance with Sarutobi. Content that his power base might not be as devastated as he thought, Sarutobi allowed his gaze to move on to the other major players. One glance at a scowling Fugaku let Sarutobi know his opinion about Naruto and the Kyuubi, although Fugaku is responsible for maintaining security and law and order within the village walls. I suppose it's only natural that having a Jinchuriki in the village would upset him. Particularly the one that had just leveled a good portion of Konoha. Thankfully, the Uchiha clan's position was probably as weakened as Sarutobi's, as in addition to their own losses, the Uchiha focused most of their efforts into the KMPF rather than seeking positions of their own. Instead, they made themselves patrons of some of Konoha's most versatile Jounin. Jounin that had been on Genin teams with Uchiha Jounin Sensei, who secured their loyalty early on, then helped their students gain prestigious positions throughout Konoha. Finishing his sweep of the room, he noticed Sum was also still in her seat with her fists clenched on the table, though her face showed some conflicting emotions ranging from anger to pity to hatred, even a bit of guilt. Sarutobi felt for her, as she was likely still dealing with both her mother-in-law's death and her husband's injuries, and Naruto was probably at the center of her storm of emotions. God knows, Sarutobi had yet to deal with his own pain at the loss of his beloved Biwako, so he understood exactly what the Inuzuka must be feeling. Finally there was Danzo himself, still sitting alone. Sarutobi knew Danzo was doing exactly what he was, observing the others to see what he could use to his advantage, who he'd have to sway or intimidate, and how he could go about doing it. Truly, the man was like a mirror opposite of himself at times. That they would be competing against each other once again was an oddly depressing thought for the aging Hokage. Before he could think further on that thought, however, Hamura and Koharu began calling for order among the room's occupants, who eventually began to return to their seats. After a few minutes, the last few council members seated themselves and the meeting continued. It was then that things truly started to go downhill. A merchant named Kisabi Takeda from the civilian portion of the council was the first to speak up, jumping to his feet as he did so. Hokage-sama, why is the monster even still alive? Kudozuki, the shinobi representing the small and relatively new Zuki clan, stood as well. If it's in a child, we can kill it for good, correct? Scattered murmurs of approval greeted this question. Don't be a fool came from a rather surprising source, though his next words quickly explained his reasoning. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki is crucial to maintaining the balance of power between the hidden villages. Besides, think of the boy's potential. With the proper training, he could become our greatest protector. With the power of the QB under our control, we could actually tip the balance of power our way once and for all, and crush all of our enemies. I'm not exaggerating in the slightest when I say that this child could bring about an era of unrivaled peace and prosperity for our village. Danzo spoke passionately despite the injuries he himself had suffered at the hand of the QB. Such passion in the face of his own loss only gave his words even more weight. This suggestion brought more murmurs until Sarutobi crushed the idea before it could truly take root. No. All talk ceased as Danzo returned to his seat. He is a hero and we owe it to him to allow him to live as normal a life as possible. Fugaku rose from his chair immediately, a look of complete outrage and disbelief painted across his face. Are you insane? This drew a handful of gasps from some of the civilians as Fugaku not only shouted at the shinobi no kami, but what he said could be taken as a direct insult. You suggest we just let that thing roam freely in our village? What if the seal fails or the child loses control? We'd never be able to evacuate the civilians in time, nor try to contain the damage. If you insist on keeping it, you must send the child somewhere else, like Training Area 44, or some other secure, yet isolated and remote location. Sarutobi's gaze hardened as he struggled briefly to keep his killing intent from leaking out. His name is Naruto, and he is no more a threat than the man who sealed the QB within him, or Mito-sama before him. Kisabi, who had remained standing, could no longer contain himself as he cried out in rage, "We should kill it now while we still can." Before Sarutobi could respond, Shibi Aburaim, perhaps the only person who had, so far anyway, kept at least his face calm, stated in a simple monotone. Killing the child will not kill the creature within him. Shibidano is correct. Killing the infant will only release the QB once more. Hayashi Hyuga nodded his head in agreement. Was that not the reason the beast was transferred to a new host when Mito Senju-sama neared the end of her life? We dare not kill him when doing so would only lead to more destruction. Danzo rose to speak once more, probably to state something about how his training methods could grant them control over Naruto and the QB. But Sarutobi beat him to it. Enough. The council silenced and looked to him once again. This council has already gone far beyond what I called it for. I've already made my decision on this matter. Fugaku, Danzo, Kisabi, and several others began to protest, only to be cut them off yet again. I only informed you as a courtesy, not to ask your opinions on this. However, I must say I am very disappointed in many of you for reacting in such a way. The majority of you have children or even grandchildren, who the Yondaime could have easily used as QB's prison instead of choosing an orphan. Sarutobi felt there was no reason to inform them of Naruto's heritage just yet. After all, without his parents to protect him, it wouldn't take long for someone or other to attempt to kidnap or assassinate him, or for one clan or the other to try to pull him into their political intrigues. Especially when Sarutobi had so few resources to protect the boy from such a threat. No, it would be best to wait until he was older and Sarutobi could spare the shinobi necessary to protect him from foreign threats, before revealing that tidbit of information. Would you be so eager to see your own child dead, or raised in isolation? He finished with a glare at the council. Despite his words, many of the council still muttered angrily. Seeing this, Sarutobi moved to try and ensure Naruto's safety and, just as importantly, the secrecy of his existence. From this point on, all information on the QB's defeat, as well as Naruto's role in it, is an S-class secret. If anyone asks, the Yondaime killed the QB and died in the process. Revealing the truth is punishable by death, as is revealing the identity of the child. Again, some members of the council began to protest, only to be silenced by Sarutobi's killer intent. Do not test me on this. All that will come of it is your deaths. The council as a whole stiffened at such a blatant threat, but no one dared to speak out. After all, while things might get a little heated in their discussions, the members of the council understood full well that they had no authority whatsoever. No matter how much they might disagree, they knew that their place was to give advice when asked for, not orders. Looking around the room, Sarutobi sighed before speaking again. Dismissed. End flashback. Yes, Sarutobi greatly regretted his decision to inform the council about Naruto. Barely an hour after he had dismissed them, a number of civilian members as well as a handful of the minor clan heads had immediately begun to spread word about Naruto and the QB, no doubt in an attempt to force him to concede to their wishes. A foolish move on their parts. Sarutobi's retribution had been swift and without mercy. More than half a dozen civilians and no less than 5 shinobi council members had been executed immediately after. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. While no other members of the council had been connected to the information leak, and almost no one else in the village would admit to knowing about Naruto, let alone draw attention to themselves by calling for his death or banishment, it had been guaranteed that the whole of the village would soon learn about the sealing. And from there, it would only be a matter of time before the other hidden villages learned of it as well, which forced Sarutobi to take more extreme measures to prevent it. Attempting to lessen the damage in any way he could, the Hokage had been left with no choice but to both inform the rest of the population and to raise the security level on all the information to SS rank. When he had given his warning to the gathered villagers and shinobi, Sarutobi had been certain to make sure they understood the full consequences of breaking his new decree. Flashback. If any of the other hidden villages were to learn of our situation, they would not hesitate to take advantage of it, he concluded as he sent a steely gaze over the assembled village. So allow me to make myself perfectly clear on this matter. You will not tell your children or anyone else who does not know. I do not care if they are in the hospital receiving treatment, or out of the village on missions, nor if they immigrate to Konoha in the future. You are not to speak of it. Ever. At this point, Sarutobi's visage hardened, and he began to radiate just enough killer intent to remind everyone why he was called the Shinobi no Kami. No one, other than myself or the child when I choose to inform him, is to reveal any information about him, or anything about the Kyuubi's defeat other than that the Yondaime gave his life to kill it, to anyone. If anyone breaks this law, they, along with their immediate family, as well as whomever they told, and their immediate family will be executed. Here his killing intent skyrocketed before disappearing. You are dismissed. As he walked away, he briefly wondered which had made the bigger impact, his impressive killing intent, or the row of nearly a dozen severed heads that had once belonged to the council members who had disobeyed him, which were impaled on pikes behind him. Hopefully, they would take his words to heart. Konoha really couldn't afford to have him execute any more shinobi, any more than they could afford teams of foreign shinobi infiltrating Konoha in an attempt to kidnap Naruto. End flashback. Sighing once again, Sarutobi reached for his trusty pipe and began trying to stuff it with tobacco one-handed. Just as he succeeded, a knock came at the door. Enter, he called wearily as he raised his pipe to his mouth and attempted to light it. A young rookie chunin named Kurenai Yahi limped into the room with an armful of reports, and stated tiredly, I have some more reports for you to look over, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi recognized her as a temporary secretary that had been working in the tower while waiting for a leg injury she received in the last chunin exams to heal. He had seen her quite often as even though he had retired he had still come in almost every day to help his successor get used to the job. Of course, he also remembered when she had been a freshly graduated genin excited about getting her first mission, but still trying to act professional in front of her leader. He couldn't help but think, getting old sucks. The Hokage sighed as he gestured vaguely towards his hardwood desk that was almost as old as he was having belonged to his predecessors and said in a grandfatherly tone, Thank you Kurenai-san, just put them anywhere. Yes Hokage-sama, replied Kurenai as she approached the Hokage's desk. However, as she drew near and set the stack of papers down in one of the few clear spaces on the crowded table, she realized just what it was that the Hokage cradled in his arm. Kurenai's crimson eyes widened in surprise at the sight before they narrowed in anger when she took note of what occupied the Hokage's other hand. Hokage-sama! She snapped indignantly. What on earth are you doing? The Hokage looked up at her in surprise for her sudden outburst as he removed his pipe from his mouth and blinked owlishly up at her. As he did this, his hand seemed to unconsciously drift closer to the newly awakened child, who blindly flailed one hand up to the object in the Hokage's hand. Kurenai's arms whipped forward and snatched the infant from her surprised leader's arms, then quickly moving to a nearby open window. The Hokage jumped to his feet and moved to follow her before she glared at him and snapped, I can't believe you could be so irresponsible, Hokage-sama. The Hokage looked at her in confusion, which unknown to Kurenai was the only thing that saved her life, as she continued angrily. A man of your age and status should know better than to smoke around an infant. The Hokage looked even more surprised for a moment, before he smiled widely of all things. This of course did nothing to soothe an irate Kurenai, who never noticed the Umbu in the shadows above the window who was just a fraction of a second away from using the ninja wire in his hands to end her life. She also missed Sarutobi's subtle signal causing said arms to recede back into the shadows, while she continued to scold him. What if he burned his hand or some embers fell on him? Not to mention second-hand smoke. The Hokage gave a sheepish chuckle at this, before he spoke in that grandfatherly tone he was so well known for. My apologies Kurenai-san, I've been so busy it slipped my mind, not that that is a very good excuse of course. It was then that Kurenai remembered just who she was scolding, before her face turned red as she began stammering an apology. Forgive me Hokage-sama, I shouldn't have yelled at you like that. She bowed as well as she could while holding a baby, who was becoming more and more fidgety. Sarutobi chuckled as he looked at the suddenly blushing and nervous Kunoichi who cradled young Naruto. It warmed his heart to see someone react in such a positive way when it came to Naruto's health. It also made him glad he had been as tired and off guard as he was. Otherwise he might have killed the well-meaning chunin without understanding her intentions. It's quite alright Kurenai-san, You were only looking out for the welfare of young Naruto, and for that you have my heartfelt thanks. Before Kurenai could respond, little Naruto started crying loudly. She began to rock him while making hushing sounds. Sarutobi smiled at the little domestic scene, before he spoke again. It sounds like little Naruto is hungry again. He then looked around his office for the bottle he had prepared earlier. Finding it among his paperwork, he tiredly moved to take Naruto back from Kurenai. However, when he reached out for him, Kurenai bit her lip and nervously offered, "I can feed him for now, Hokage-sama. I'm sure you would like a moment of peace, perhaps to finish smoking your pipe?" Sarutobi's eyes narrowed imperceptibly as he read the Chunin's body language, trying to determine if she might be a threat to Naruto after all. Seeing only an earnest young girl, Sarutobi nodded his assent before handing the bottle over to the kunoichi. On his way out, Sarutobi subtly signaled to the Tori Mastambu hidden in the shadows above Kurenai, the wire that he was about to use to garrote her before Sarutobi stopped him still held in his hands. His message was perfectly clear. If it looked like she intended to harm Naruto, kill her. Kurenai smiled gently as she looked down at the blonde drinking eagerly in her arms. She had of course heard all about just who and what the infant was. However, she just could not associate the adorable child with the demon fox many were accusing him of being. He's a lot better behaved than some of those brats I had to babysit during all those D-rank missions, she thought to herself with a smile. When he finished his bottle, Kurenai pulled down his blanket a bit to examine him more closely. On the rare occasions that he opened his eyes, she could see that he had sky-blue eyes with slit pupils. Eyes that appeared to be filled with curiosity that seemed to look right into her soul, and when his lips moved into what might have been a smile, the weight of the world just seemed to lighten, and those birthmarks. They were so cute. Feeling a slight tug on one of her fingers, she looked to see Naruto had wrapped his tiny hand around her index finger, tugging on it curiously. It was at that moment that Naruto yawned sleepily. No longer able to resist, Kurenai let out a quiet squeal and began speaking nonsensical baby talk to the sleepy child. Once Kurenai calmed down from her snuggle fest with Naruto, she began gently rocking him again until he dropped back off to sleep. As Kurenai was busy with her baby talk, a young Tatsu Mastambu in the room turned to his Tori masked captain and began signaling to his superior, "What is she doing?" His superior simply signed back, "Don't worry about it, it's a chick thing, so there is no understanding it." Both Umbu felt a chill run through them as the lone female of their detail glared at them. They quickly returned to their positions with Kurenai still completely unaware of their shadowy presence. It was a heartwarming sight for Sarutobi when he re-entered the room to find Kurenai rocking a sleeping Naruto. A quick and discreet check with his Umbu guards confirmed that everything was fine, though two of them seemed oddly shaken, and why was Tori looking everywhere but at Hibi? Gently clearing his throat to get her attention, Sarutobi motioned for Kurenai to hand him Naruto, which she did, albeit a tad reluctantly. "Thank you for watching him, Kurenai-chan," he said quietly so as not to disturb Naruto. He carefully retook his seat and sighed as he glanced at the reports he had yet to look over. Attempting to put them off just a little longer, he addressed Kurenai again, "Is there anything else you need?" He watched as Kurenai bit her lips somewhat nervously, before she finally spoke hesitantly, "Hokage-sama, if I may ask you a question." Curious, Sarutobi agreed to her request with a nod. "Well, it's just that what are you planning to do with Naruto now?" Sarutobi sighed at this question, one of many he had considered in the past hour. His original plan had been simple enough. With Naruto's identity as the third Jinchuriki known only to a few, and his identity as Minato's child known to fewer still, it would have been child's play to hide him by adopting the boy as an example to the rest of the village. It wouldn't appear strange to any outsiders in the wake of the Kyuubi's attack. God knew there were plenty of new orphans in need of a new home and family. That was no longer an option, sadly, thanks to the treasonous actions of a handful of scared, angry, mourning fools. If he took Naruto in now, the entire village would know within days. No, Naruto would find no peace with Sarutobi's clan, and he simply didn't have the shinobi necessary to protect him from internal or external threats if he was out in the open like that. However, he could still hide Naruto in obscurity for a time, if he was willing to ensure that the child was kept out of sight in one of Konoha's several orphanages. It would be years before the boy was old enough to begin to wander on his own, and even then he was likely to stay with the other children, who would provide him with some further anonymity, and he would be watched by the orphanage caretakers. In that case, he would only need a handful of Umbu to watch over the child, and by the time Naruto started heading out alone, the village may have come to not forgive perhaps, but certainly their anger would be dulled by then. And if not, Sarutobi should have been able to replenish his shinobi ranks by then, enough to increase Naruto's Umbu guard if necessary. The question of when he would be able to reveal the boy's heritage was one he couldn't answer yet. Seeing the young kunoichi still waiting, he answered vaguely, "For the next few months I will care for him. Then, When things have calmed down somewhat, he will be placed in an orphanage and eventually, I hope he will be adopted within a few years. Other than that, I have no plans for him. Seeing the uneasy look on the kunoichi's face, and seeing an opportunity to further test the young girl, Sarutobi smiled and reassured her. Don't worry, I plan to have an umbu watch him at all times. I will not allow him to be harmed. Nodding, Kurenai stood at attention and said, By your leave, Hokage-sama? Once Sarutobi nodded, she leaned in close and planted a soft kiss on Naruto's forehead before saying, Good night, Naruto-chan, and sweet dreams. She then straightened, bowed respectfully to Sarutobi, and left the room. Once she was gone, Sarutobi began to shift through the latest reports on his desk, while thinking on another problem concerning little Naruto. The child had yet to have a checkup, both because the hospital was currently all but overwhelmed by the many casualties from the attack. It had even been necessary to set up satellite clinics and field hospitals in order to accommodate all of the wounded on top of the normal day-to-day operations, and because many of the doctors he'd asked were refusing to have anything to do with him. Although, to be fair, most of them didn't even bother to listen to Sarutobi's requests beyond a newborn's checkup before somewhat angrily pointing out that they didn't have the time to waste on something so relatively trivial. Only a few actually refused because of who and what Naruto was. Sarutobi would be lying if he said he wasn't disappointed, but emotions were still running high in the village, and would likely continue to do so for weeks to come. So, he could understand their position as well, even if he didn't agree. Coincidentally, that was one of the reasons why he kept Naruto with him rather than at the hospital. Thinking it over, he decided to see if he could track down his old student, Tsunade. While it would be nice if she returned, I doubt I can convince her to set foot in Konoha again. He sighed, something he seemed to be doing a lot tonight. It might take a little convincing, but I'm sure she would at least be willing to perform a checkup or two on little Naruto so long as I go to her. Of course, tracking Tsunade would take some time given her habits, but given the delicacy of the situation, as well as the complication of Minato's largely unknown seal, Tsunade was actually probably the best one to examine the child anyway. And maybe by the time Sarutobi returned, things would have calmed down among at least some of Konoha's medical staff, and he could find Naruto's future doctor among them. With that decided, Sarutobi turned his attention back to the reports on his desk once more. 2 weeks later. It was only luck that allowed Sarutobi to find Tsunade so soon, let alone so close to the village. He'd expected to have to wait months to find her, which was longer than he was willing to wait to get Naruto examined. The situation back in Konoha had not improved much when it came to the medical establishment, and the doctors and medic nin were still being run ragged to try and see to all of the wounded, and they were still failing to do so. It was times like these that Sarutobi dearly wished he'd been able to implement Tsunade's medic nin policy. The extra medic nin would have been a welcome addition right now, only slightly less welcome than Tsunade herself returning free of her hemophobia. So, with the situation in Konoha still too volatile and emotionally charged, and unwilling to take the risk of sending Tsunade a letter only to have her run, Sarutobi took Naruto and a small security contingent of umbu to the nearby gambling town where Tsunade was currently wallowing in her sorrows. Sarutobi smiled as he thought of the fond memories involving his only female student. He chuckled sadly as he remembered how vibrant and full of life she had once been. It truly pained him to read Jiraiya's reports of what had become of his most caring and dedicated student. Heartbroken by the loss of first her younger brother, and then later her lover, who died in her arms, she simply wandered from gambling town to gambling town, drinking herself into a stupor whenever she wasn't gambling and losing horribly. On her worst days she did both. Putting aside his guilt, Sarutobi signaled to his umbu to disperse and entered the small hotel where Tsunade and her apprentice were staying. Once he had entered his former student's room undetected, a simple task for a Hokage, he cradled Naruto in one arm while removing a storage scroll from his robes. Biting his thumb to draw a small amount of blood, he unrolled the scroll with a simple flourish, and a crib and baby bag, complete with a prepared bottle, appeared in a puff of smoke. Sarutobi smiled as Naruto gave a chirping gurgle sound that might have been a laugh at the display, before placing him in the crib and putting an old stuffed monkey that once belonged to his son next to him. As he watched Naruto cling to the monkey's tail while he fell asleep, Sarutobi began thinking about his former student. While he would be overjoyed to have her return to the village, if for nothing else than to have someone he could trust implicitly with Naruto's heritage, safety, and health, he highly doubted he could convince her to come back. Perhaps I've been too lenient with her. I suppose I could try asking or simply ordering her, but on the other hand, she always was stubborn and with a temper to match. Before he could further debate with himself about trying to talk Tsunade into returning, he picked up the sound of angry footsteps marching through the hall towards the room. These particular angry footsteps were ones he'd recognize anywhere. Moments later Tsunade marched in through the door, slamming it open in the process. This of course woke Naruto with a start, causing him to cry. Tsunade wasn't surprised in the least when she saw her old teacher standing in her room. She'd seen the Umbu who must have grown quite arrogant since she left Konoha if they actually thought they could hide from her outside after all, and while there were far too few of them for this to be some kind of ambush, there were enough of them to be escorting someone like the Sandaime Hokage. So finding Sarutobi in her room wasn't surprising. Finding him with a baby that was currently wailing as loud as his little lungs could, however, was not something she'd expected. She opened her mouth to demand what was going on, when Sarutobi-sensei actually scolded her in a reprimanding tone. "Tsunadeheim, you woke the baby." He caught her off guard for a moment as he reached down to pick up the still wailing infant. She'd always envisioned an encounter with her old sensei going a bit differently than this. Good lord, how can something that small be so loud? She thought before narrowing her eyes suspiciously at Sarutobi. "I thought I spotted an Umbu outside," Tsunade growled, moving to sit on the couch while motioning for Shizen to close the door. "So have you come to force me back to that god-forsaken village?" she asked her old sensei with a sneer. She'd always expected that someday, Konoha would try to call her back into its service in some manner or another. And Tsunade always knew that if it came down to force, only Sarutobi and Jiraiya would have a chance of actually succeeding, regardless of her crippling fear of blood. She could also admit, even if only to herself, that Sarutobi was the only one that would have a chance of actually convincing her to come back. Not that she'd make it easy for the old geezer, of course. To her surprise, though, the old man just snorted ruefully. "Come now, Tsunade, do you really think so little of me? I don't intend to force you to do anything." Chuckling, he added, "After all, you always were my most stubborn student." Tsunade scowled at that, before giving a reluctant snort of amusement, while Sarutobi worked to calm the brat down. "I don't think the man who convinced Biwako I don't need a man Sarutobi to marry him gets to comment on anyone's stubbornness." Much to her worry, the old man only smiled sadly rather than give the bark of laughter Tsunade was used to whenever her sensei's nigh legendary courtship was mentioned. Frowning, Tsunade studied Sarutobi intently as he continued to rock the brat, sad smile locked in place but his eyes blank, distant. And that's all it really took for Tsunade to realize the woman was dead, undoubtedly one of many victims of the Kyuubi attack. In another life, Tsunade might have offered condolences or some other form of comfort to the man who was practically a second father to her. Sadly, that life ended with medic named Career the night Dan died. Shifting her focus to the now quiet child, Tsunade was surprised to see that instead of dropping back off to sleep, the brat shifted until it was looking over at her, curiosity apparent in its eyes for the split second they were open. Then the kid apparently decided nothing important was going on, and he'd rather sleep after all. More than a little curious herself, and wanting to break the nearly awkward silence, Tsunade finally had to ask, "What's with the brat anyway, sensei?" Sarutobi looked up from the kid to stare at her with what she could have sworn was anger in his eyes, except for the fact that there wasn't any reason for him to be angry, then cryptically explained, "His name is Naruto, Tsunade, and he is why I've come to see you." Tsunade cocked an eyebrow at that before scoffing at the cryptic answer. "What do you mean? What does he have to do with anything?" She watched closely as something akin to a mixture of guilt and frustration passed through his eyes before he calmed his face and answered her, "Well, Tsunade, I would like for you to run a checkup on little Naruto for me. It really is vital that you do so. He came all the way here just weeks after the village was almost destroyed for a baby's checkup." Tsunade wondered incredulously before narrowing her eyes. "No, there's something more to this than what he's telling me." "And why exactly would you need me to do that?" Tsunade asked suspiciously. "What's wrong with the village's doctors?" She watched as the guilt and anger passed through his eyes once again. She didn't have a chance to ponder that as he stiffly answered, "They cannot be trusted with him at this time. Although I have every confidence the situation will improve as things calm down, I'm afraid Naruto here couldn't wait." To say Tsunade was shocked by that was an understatement. She had practically built the hospital and the medical practice in Konoha herself, one of the few things she could call her legacy, and to hear that, for some reason, the staff there couldn't be trusted with a simple checkup for an infant was like a slap in the face. "Just who is this kid that you can't trust him with the doctors there?" Tsunade gritted out from clenched teeth. "I mean, I can imagine how hectic things must be for them if the damage from the Kyuubi attack was even half what the rumors say, but that shouldn't be enough to say they can't be trusted." She paused for a moment as a thought struck her. "For that matter, why do you need another checkup so soon after birth anyway?" There it was again, that same look on his face for a fraction of a second. "That is because Naruto has yet to have a single checkup." "That doesn't make any sense. Any newborn would have had multiple checkups before he was even released from the hospital." Tsunade protested in disbelief. "What aren't you telling me, sensei?" Tsunade narrowed her eyes once more as she asked, "Why not? Just who is this brat that he's so important that you'd come all the way out here just so he could have a standard exam?" Her old sensei glanced at Shizen for an instant before meeting her eyes. Perhaps we should speak in private, he suggested in a way that she knew wasn't a suggestion at all. Shit village secrets? I wonder what could be so important about this kid. She wondered to herself with a frown. Well, looks like I'm about to find out either way. Whether I want to or not. She nodded in understanding, despite her distaste for anything to do with that wretched village that had stolen everything from her. Shizen, said girl jumped in surprise at suddenly being spoken to. Yes, Tsunade-sama? Tsunade stood up from the couch, still watching the old man warily. Watch the kid. Getting a nod from Sarutobi-sensei, the slug Sannin walked towards the bedroom while the old man carefully handed the brat to a visibly nervous Shizen. Once they entered the bedroom, Sarutobi closed the door, and went through the process of placing a series of Fuinjutsu tags on the walls, just before the walls glowed slightly as what could simplistically be called a privacy jutsu took effect. Whatever this is about, he's not taking any chances of anyone else hearing about it. What could be so important about this kid? And why do I get the feeling that I'm not going to like the answer? Sitting in the room's only chair, she fixed the old man with a stern stare. Alright, talk. Shizen bit her lip worriedly as the bedroom door closed behind the Hokage. Tsunade-sama's general mood could often be described as irritable, and considering she was both sober and had just lost an enormous amount of money gambling, a very bad mood would be a serious understatement for the woman's current temper. Shizen also knew that Tsunade-sama had a habit of breaking things, or people, when she was in such a mood. On the other hand, the Sandaime was her old sensei. Surely he knew about Tsunade-sama's temper and could handle himself right? Although I'm not sure if I want him to be able to handle Tsunade-sama. What if he wants something from her? Surely the Sandaime wouldn't leave the village just for an infant's checkup? After all, Konoha is renowned for its medical facilities in comparison to the other hidden villages, so why would the Hokage say they couldn't be trusted? Of course, Shizen knew full well some of the darker possibilities. Possibilities that had nothing to do with the capability of Konoha's medical establishment. Shizen had been born during the early days of the Second Great Shinobi War, and her uncle had been a powerful and influential jounin during that time. It was impossible for her not to have learned the darker side of Konoha politics as the various clans and factions within Konoha attempted to recruit and manipulate her uncle. Beyond that, she'd become a genin and then rose to chunin during the Third Great Shinobi War, arguably one of the most destructive and chaotic of the Great Wars, and was the apprentice of one of the Sannin. She knew the role Jiraiya had played in Kazurogakyu's fall, the truth behind the disappearance of the Rinha clan, even the existence of the shadow war between the Umbu of Konoha and those of the Hanyashu. Oh yes, she could well imagine the kinds of things that could lead to a Hokage keeping a child hidden from all but the most trusted of shinobi. Before she could ponder this further, Shizen blinked as she felt something gripping the front of her kimono. Looking down with a start, she saw the child with a tiny fistful of her kimono. Oh! I can't believe I forgot about you. Flustered, she put the infant Naruto, the Sandaime called him, in the crib. However, the moment she put him down, he began fidgeting and blindly reaching up for her while making distressed sounds. Picking him back up and grabbing the stuffed monkey from the crib at the same time, she took a seat on the couch as she examined him curiously. He had a fuzzy mop of tiny blonde hairs, a quick peek revealed sapphire blue eyes with slit pupils almost like an Inuzuka if the child's hair and eye color weren't completely different from what she remembered of the clan, and 6 strange birthmarks, 3 on each cheek, which seemed almost like whiskers. Smiling, she couldn't resist giggling. You know, you're pretty cute, little Naruto. He let out what might have been a laugh as she danced the monkey up and down his legs. As she continued, the bedroom door slammed open and out stomped an enraged Tsunade. As Shizen tried to comfort the now crying and startled infant, Tsunade reached out and snatched little Naruto from her. Shizen opened her mouth to protest her mentor's actions, but her sensei interrupted her. Shizen! She flinched slightly at Tsunade-sama's tone, letting her protests die before she could finish them. Yes, Tsunade-sama? She answered somewhat hesitantly. Her sensei was obviously in a very bad mood right now. When she heard her teacher's orders, she was appalled. But Tsunade-sama dash. She let her protests die when Tsunade glared at her. Shivering slightly, she gave in. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Sending one last glance at the crying infant in her mentor's arms, Shizen left to carry out her orders. Sarutobi watched his student sit in the room's only chair, before she fixed him with a stern look and said one word, talk. Knowing her volatile temper, Sarutobi thought for a moment to see if there was an easy way to explain, preferably one that wouldn't ignite her fiery temper. There wasn't. I really wish Jiraiya was here. He's always been good at being a target for Tsunade's temper. Sighing, he began his story. As I'm sure you're aware by now, 2 weeks ago Konoha was attacked by the Kyubi no Kitsune. Tsunade nodded impatiently at this. What you don't know is just how the Yondaime defeated it. He then told Tsunade about the sealing technique and its various costs, about Naruto, who he told her was an orphan of unknown heritage, and his reasoning behind the decision to inform the council. He also informed her about what the result of that particular decision was, and the difficulties facing Konoha's medical personnel. He watched as her face grew angrier and angrier. Sarutobi knew that soon, her temper would explode. He was not disappointed. Tsunade couldn't believe what she had just been told. The Yondaime, one of the kindest men she had ever met, had condemned an orphan to a, possibly short, life of struggle and, in all likelihood, fear and pain. She was even angrier to learn of what her sensei had done, and she made sure he was aware of it. "You senile old fool!" she exploded. "What have you been smoking, crack?" She stood from her chair to glare down at her old sensei. "I thought you were supposed to be smart," she continued before he could defend himself. "Professor, my ass. What could have made you think it was a good idea to inform the entire council about this? Why didn't you just tell the elders and Umbu? They were the only ones who actually needed to know. Hell, you still haven't even told me who the second Jinchuriki was, and my grandmother was the first. But you'll tell dozens of random shinobi and civilians about the third?" As she took a breath to continue her rant, Sarutobi spoke. "I had to inform someone, Tsunade. I'm already an old man, and while informing the council might have been a mistake, there weren't a great many options. The rest of Konoha's leadership were either killed, or are as old as I am. Both the Umbu ranks and the shinobi portion of the council took heavy casualties as well. Besides, I did not think they would be so willing to risk their own death, especially the civilian members, not when they were explicitly told what would happen. It appears some of them have grown arrogant in the power afforded them by their status." Tsunade growled at that. "So what makes you think that they'll keep their mouths shut now?" She fumed as Sarutobi pulled his pipe from the folds of his robe and began packing it with tobacco, taking his time in answering her. "I am fairly certain that the dozen heads decorating the front of the Hokage Tower will suffice to remind them why they should follow my orders." He then lit his pipe and began to puff on it. She opened her mouth to begin again when he beat her to the punch. "So, now that I have explained the situation, will you perform a checkup on Naruto?" Tsunade glared at him for changing the subject, but relented seeing how she really wanted to get drunk and just forget about this whole fiasco, and she knew that both her sensei and Shizen would gang up on her about her drinking habits. Better to get rid of the old man as soon as she could, since she was pretty used to ignoring Shizen's scoldings. "Fine," she spat as she stomped to the door and slammed it open. Once she entered the room, she was presented with the brat's unbelievably loud cries. Wincing at the volume, she walked to her apprentice, who was trying to calm the kid. Reaching out, she scooped the blonde brat out of Shizen's arms and barked, "Shizen!" Shizen's half-formed protest ceased as she instinctively answered, "Yes, Tsunade-sama?" "Go buy me sake, a lot of it. And hurry up." Shizen protested, but Tsunade silenced her with a glare. "Yes, Tsunade-sama." Looking down at the still crying baby, Tsunade's eyes softened slightly as she began rocking him. Wasn't like it was the brat's fault she had to put up with all this bullshit. "Sure, it's alright, little one. There's nothing to be afraid of." Once he calmed down, she ran a standard diagnostic jutsu on him before raising an eyebrow at the results. Next, she took a very small amount of blood to avoid triggering her hemophobia and ran another diagnostic on both him and the blood. Examining the information, she turned to her sensei and began to inform him of what she found. "Physically, he is perfectly healthy," she stated in a softer voice than before. The old man nodded in relief. Apparently, he had been more worried than he had let on. "What else have you found?" he asked curiously. Falling into her old routine, Tsunade started her report with an overview on the boy's surprisingly enhanced senses. All of his senses, sight, hearing, smell, even touch and taste, are far above what one would consider normal, even among shinobi children. "Just how far above normal are they?" Sarutobi cut in curiously before she could continue. Tsunade thought for a moment to formulate her answer, knowing that while her old sensei wasn't unintelligent by any means, and could perform every single medical jutsu known to Konoha, he wasn't a medic nin by any stretch of the imagination. As such, Tsunade had to give him an answer that was simple enough for her sensei to understand, even if it wouldn't be entirely accurate as a result. His senses of smell and hearing are on par with most fully grown Inuzuka I've ever examined, and his eyesight is probably equal to an Uchiha or Hyuga without their Dijitsu, of course. Not to mention, his senses of taste and touch are several times above normal, though the latter will make him quite sensitive to sensations of pain or pleasure, and he'll probably be a picky eater because of the former. She looked down at Naruto for a moment as she dryly concluded, "Impressive, for a 2-week-old brat." Sarutobi nodded thoughtfully as he asked, "Anything else unusual?" Tsunade hesitated before answering, wondering if she'd be doing more harm than good by telling him. His body seems to heal fairly quickly. Seeing Sarutobi's questioning look, she elaborated. Not like regeneration or the effects of medical jutsu, mind you, and he'll certainly scar just like anyone else. But at the same time, he'll probably be able to survive injuries that would kill most others. It actually reminds me of the old stories about the Uzumaki clan's longevity. Tsunade's thoughts came to a halt before staring at Sarutobi angrily. Is he from the Uzumaki clan? I thought you said he was an orphan, yet he bears the Uzumaki surname, and appears to have their lunge. No, he's not from the Uzumaki clan. Sarutobi sighed, interrupting her this time. I gave him the surname in honor of Mito-sama, and of the friendship that Konoha had with Yuzushiyo Gakure and the Uzumaki clan. All of these enhanced abilities of his are likely the result of the Kyuubi being sealed within him, along with the seals Minato used. Tsunade stared at him for a moment, unsure as to whether or not he was actually telling the truth. On the one hand, the boy's healing factor was quite similar to what she knew of the Uzumaki clan's longevity, and it wasn't every day that the name of a dead clan was so nonchalantly bestowed on an orphan. On the other hand, there had never been a newborn Jinchuriki that she knew of, so who's to say that the Kyuubi couldn't have been responsible for the boy's altered physiology? And besides, what reason would Sarutobi have to lie to her about this? Tsunade felt her gut clench as she realized that either way, it was all but guaranteed that Kushina, the last of her family no matter how distant, was most certainly dead. Had she been alive, she never would have consented to bestowing her clan name on a child that wasn't hers, or that she didn't intend to raise as her own. Which meant she would have been here with Sarutobi. And her old sensei would never have given the boy that surname without Kushina's consent if the woman were still alive. Sarutobi's voice drew her out of her morbid musings before her depression could take hold of her. Still, this is a very interesting development. Perhaps these abilities could be passed down to Naruto's children as some form of a bloodline or another? Particularly that healing factor, if it's as similar to the Uzumaki's longevity, as you claim. Sarutobi pondered aloud. Tsunade glared at him, both for the insinuation that she didn't know what she was talking about even if he hadn't meant it that way, and for thinking about something like the benefits Naruto's bloodline could have for the village in the future, regardless of how pragmatic such thoughts were. Seeing her look, Sarutobi was quick to explain himself. This information may make the council more willing to accept Naruto, rather than constantly complaining Abio. Or, Tsunade interrupted pessimistically. It may make them all the more eager to try to kill him. After all, it certainly wouldn't be the first time a clan had decided to prevent competition from an emerging bloodline. Even if said bloodline had the potential to benefit the village as a whole. Or even worse, it might make them decide he'd make a nice addition to their own clans, causing them to drag him into their politics, and God help him, political marriages. The old man sighed in frustration. I am doing all I can to keep him safe and free of the politics, Tsunade-cha dash. And what happens when your all isn't enough? She interrupted again, too angry to care about protocol. How much suffering will be inflicted on him because of the yondaime, and your foolishness? You of all people should remember how my grandmother was treated, even after all she'd done for Konoha before sealing the Kyuubi within herself, and even after years of keeping the Bijus safely locked away. She watched the Hokage's eyes narrow in anger before he uncharacteristically yelled, What would you have me do? Tsunade glared at him when the startled Naruto began to cry again. Quiet! She hissed softly. What did I just tell you about his hearing? She asked as she comforted the wailing infant. The old man's visage softened into that of a tired old man as he looked at her and the crying child. Forgive me, he said softly before continuing, but what would you have me do? What else can I do? The attack was barely 2 weeks ago, parts of the village are in ruin, and I have more dead and injured than our doctors and medic need can handle. A large number of the shinobi I currently have under my command are teenagers, many of whom just lost their loved ones to the Kyuubi, and I have clan heads that are barely 20 in some cases, or weren't even supposed to be clan heads in the first place. All of this less than a year after the end of the Third Great Shinobi War. I can't even get Jiraiya to stick around, or to help in any way other than his spy network. Tsunade thought furiously while she continued to comfort the child in her arms. What could he do? Is there any more that could be done? Realistically, no, there really wasn't much more that could be done for Naruto, not now that his status was well known within Konoha. She frowned sadly at the child once he began to calm down. It's not fair. He's too young for such a burden. Not to mention how the village will treat him. She had no doubt what would happen to Naruto if he grew up in that accursed village. She had met several Jinchuriki in her life and none of them were well-adjusted or well-treated individuals. Not particularly sane either. And there were undoubtedly many in Konoha who knew or thought they knew that as well. Those misconceptions were almost as damning to the boy as the truth. And in their fear, Konoha would likely bring them about. Even her grandmother had been feared by many, though the woman always seemed to take it all in stride. Whether or not that was because she was already a full-grown woman, not to mention a powerful kunoichi who had survived the era of the hidden clans as well as seen the birth of the hidden villages era, or because she had a lifetime of good experiences as well as family to fall back on, was something that Tsunade had never truly been able to discern. Sighing, she turned back to Sarutobi as he asked her, "Is there anything else I should know about Naruto's health?" She recognized the change of subject for what it was and was grateful for it. Other than a higher than usual rate of metabolism, no. On that note, Naruto began to cry again. "I'll take care of it," Tsunade offered as she checked the boy's diaper before standing and digging around in Naruto's baby bag for his bottle. Her old sensei sighed and walked toward the door. "Very well, thank you for your help. I'll gather my umbu and come back for Naruto and his things when he's done feeding." She nodded distractedly as she found Naruto's bottle and returned to her chair before she began to feed the little tyke. Once he was finished, she placed the bottle on the table. Naruto gurgled happily while stretching and kicking his little feet. Looking down at him, she smiled sadly while thinking about how quickly the village would ruin that beautiful innocence of his, of the suffering they would no doubt inflict on him with their ignorant prejudice. After all, that was a large part of the reason that the identity of Konoha's second Jinchuriki was kept such a well-guarded secret, even from her. Not that it had done them much good, as the Kyuubi attack meant the former Jinchuriki had either been killed, or lost control of their burden. And somewhere along the line, her thoughts began to take a darker turn. I can't let him be destroyed by that place. He shouldn't have to suffer so much. Slowly she raised her hand until it rested on his frail neck. Just one quick snap is all it would take. She thought, just one snap and he'll be safe from the future that awaits him back in the village. Ordinarily, she could never condone killing an infant, but unlike the villagers, she would do it only to protect him from the hatred and suffering that he would undoubtedly face. Granted, the Kyuubi would eventually reform itself, but that would take years if not decades. In her mind there were no other viable options. Sarutobi would never willingly allow Naruto to live outside the village, not with one of the Bijus sealed inside him. The security risk was simply too great. And she certainly couldn't try to take him by force, even if she wasn't still dealing with her own problems. She had no doubt Sarutobi and his umbu would be able to stop her. While Tsunade may be one of the Sannin, she also had a crippling fear of blood. There was no way she could fight her way through while carrying an infant, if the sight of more than a pinprick of blood caused her to shut down. Even if by some chance she succeeded, she and Shizen would both be declared missing nin and hunted down by everyone from bounty hunters to oinin. So really her only options were to either let him be taken back to the village that she truly believed would destroy the boy, or a quick mercy killing. Compared to the quick and painless death she could give him, the village was unlikely to be as merciful regardless of Sarutobi's wishes and intentions. She tightened her hand and looked away. Her eyes began to water uncontrollably as she took a shuddering breath. She squeezed her eyes shut and gave a whispered "I'm sorry." She was ready to finish her task. Just as she was about to snap Naruto's neck, she felt a soft tug on one of her braids. Opening her eyes, she was greeted by an adorable sight. In his blind flailing, little Naruto had somehow gotten a hold of her braid that had been hanging over her shoulder. She watched as he curiously placed her hair in his mouth, still tugging at it slightly, and somehow avoiding getting any hair wrapped around his tiny fingers. The sight melted her heart, and reminded her of beliefs and convictions that she had carried throughout her life, even if they'd been tarnished by all that Konoha had taken from her. Removing her hand from his neck, followed by her hair from his hand, she did nothing to stop the tears that trailed down her cheeks as her rampant emotions raged back and forth. She brought him close and laid a kiss on his forehead. She held him to her chest and wept silently at his fate and her lack of willpower to save him from it. Please, she prayed to whoever was listening, please someone, anyone, keep him safe, keep him happy. Please don't let them destroy him, please. Later. She stood next to Shizen as they watched Sarutobi and his escort leave the town with Naruto. Did they really have to leave so soon, Tsunade-sama? Her apprentice asked disappointedly. The old man can't afford to be away for too long, you know that, she replied grumpily. He shouldn't have even come out here in the first place. I know, Shizen sighed wistfully, still I wish he and little Naruto could have stayed a bit longer. He's so adorable, I almost wish we could have kept him. Tsunade snorted in amusement at her apprentice's near squeal before fondly thinking of how true the statement was. He was pretty cute for a brat. Do you think we'll ever see him again, Tsunade-sama? Shizen questioned curiously, the truth behind the brat's identity unknown to her. Who knows? She replied sadly while thinking to herself, if we do ever meet again, I just hope he can still smile by then. Hell, I hope he's still human by then. It was by no means a certainty considering the relatively short average lifespan of Jinchuriki in other villages, or of their sanity. If only she knew the horrors he would see. 3 years later. A small child cried as he walked through the streets alone. While some might find this somewhat alarming and offer assistance to the child, few if any would give any help to this particular child for reasons as varied as anger, fear, hatred, or just sheer indifference. His name was Naruto Uzumaki, and he was a monster. He didn't know why he was a monster, but all of the adults told him he was, and surely they knew what they were talking about. After all, only the old man ever said he wasn't, and while he seemed really smart, he was still just one man that Naruto only saw from time to time. The reason for Naruto's tears today was his recent trip to a park near his orphanage. He had often heard about parks from the other children at the orphanage, and had always dreamed of going to one. The other children had made it sound like a lot of fun and a place to make friends. Naruto had never been allowed outside of the orphanage walls before and was only rarely allowed around the other orphans, so he was always lonely when the old man wasn't around. For some reason though, that had all been changed 3 days ago during one of the old man's visits, and now Naruto could go wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted, as long as he was back at the orphanage by sunset. So after a few days to test and get used to his new freedom, Naruto decided to go to a park a few blocks away that the other children had talked about. Once he got there, he had been amazed at what, to him, seemed to be a paradise. There were all kinds of sandboxes, and swings, and slides, and some odd metal contraptions that Naruto would later learn were called seesaws and jungle gyms. And most importantly, there were children of varying ages all around, just playing and having fun. Naruto had watched in fascination as a little girl had walked up to a group of children and simply asked, "Can I play?" And just like that, she was a part of the group. Naruto wanted that. Naruto had eagerly run to the other children to try to make friends, certain it would be as easy as it had been for the little girl. Alas, this was not to be, as the moment Naruto got within arm's reach, a swarm of parents showed up and began grabbing their children away from him. Then came the whispering. "Stay away from him, he's a bad boy, he's dangerous, if I ever catch you near him, you'll be grounded for a month, don't even look at him," being among the most common whispers. After just a few minutes, Naruto was left completely alone once more. When the last of the parents and their children began to walk away from him, Naruto couldn't hold in his tears any longer. He ran from the park crying and asking himself, "What did I do? Why doesn't anyone like me?" It never occurred to the young child that the adults might have been afraid of him. After all, as far as most children were concerned, grown-ups weren't afraid of anything, one of the many reasons children were so eager to grow up. It also never occurred to him that for every parent that told their children to stay away from him, there were 2 or 3 who didn't even seem to notice him, preoccupied as they were with going about their own lives. All he saw were parents dragging their children away from him, and all he heard were those terrible whispers. Naruto was so lost in his confusion and pain that he never saw the balding man with a graying mustache until he was stumbling back from the force of his collision with the man. He did see it when the man grabbed him by the arm though, and he definitely noticed when the man began to curse angrily while shaking him back and forth. Terrified at this new experience, Naruto tried to pull away, but he never really had a chance against a fully grown adult. Naruto flinched fearfully as the man raised his hand in the air as if to strike him, which almost made him miss the man being hit in the head with a rock. The villager stumbled to the side from the hit and loosened his grip enough for Naruto to pull free and run. Had he looked back, he would have seen a pair of UMBU members Shunshin into view, jab a pressure point on the man, then Shunshin away with the villager in tow. If he had, then he might have been frozen in wonder and fear at the sight, and as a result, what was about to occur might have been prevented. Instead, he ran on for another block or 2 before ducking into an alley to catch his breath. Once his lungs were no longer pumping like a bellows, Naruto poked his head around the corner, nervously checking to make sure that the scary man hadn't decided to chase him. Breathing a sigh of relief when he found no trace of the villager in the crowd, Naruto fearfully decided to cut through the alleyway just to be sure. Turning around, Naruto made his way through the back street, which, as far as alleys went, was fairly nice. Sure, there were a number of garbage cans and some discarded magazines and bottles, but overall it was fairly well kept. Certainly there was nothing about the alley that would have made him wary or fearful, so when he suddenly found himself lying face first on the ground, he was caught completely off guard. Trying to focus through the agonizing pain in the back of his head, Naruto unsteadily tried to push himself to his knees. He barely managed to even get his hands under him before a hand buried itself in his hair and pulled him completely off the ground and threw him into the wall, painfully ripping out a fistful of his hair in the process. Disoriented, Naruto collapsed to the ground and struggled fitfully to draw in another breath. Between the lack of air and the pain in his head and his back, Naruto never saw the foot that slammed into his stomach, driving what little air he had left out of his lungs. Looking up through watering eyes, Naruto finally got a look at his attacker, though in his confusion it still took him a moment to realize that he was being attacked. Though Naruto lacked the life experience to know the difference at the time, the man was a civilian, probably a merchant of some kind if one were to judge by the make and quality of the man's clothing. The man had brown hair that fell to his collar, but was combed over a rather large bald spot on top. He wasn't much more than average in height, but he towered over Naruto's small frame. Naruto didn't even have the chance to formulate a sentence as the man growled and grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off his feet before slamming him repeatedly against the alley wall. What terrified Naruto the most, though, wasn't the suddenness of the attack, nor was it the attack itself. It was how quiet the man was. The only sound he made was the grinding of his teeth and the ragged breathing. He just kept looking at Naruto with those hurtful eyes. Now truly afraid, not to mention coherent enough to be afraid, Naruto tried desperately to draw enough breath to scream, to call for help, to beg for mercy, anything to make the pain and terror go away. Unfortunately, between the hands squeezing his throat and being repeatedly slammed into the wall, he was already approaching unconsciousness. Luckily, or unluckily depending on your view, the merchant stopped suddenly and threw him to the ground once more, allowing Naruto to painfully gasp for air. Naruto's respite was short-lived though, as his unnamed assailant straddled his chest, easily pinning Naruto's arms down with his legs. Trying once again to suck in enough air to scream, Naruto felt a horrible stabbing sensation in his right side. Coughing, Naruto's terror grew 100-fold when he saw his own blood splatter out from his mouth. Only later would he learn that the man's kick had not only broken 2 of his ribs, but it had also forced one of the bone fragments into his right lung. Finally the man spoke, his face scrunched up in disgust. "Little bastard! How dare you soil me with your tainted blood?" Naruto could only whimper in confusion and fear as the man drove a fist into his face, breaking his nose with a sickening crunch. Naruto's head swam with the sheer agony he was experiencing. Combined with broken ribs, bruised throat, and the lung that was slowly filling up with blood and other bodily fluids, Naruto was on the verge of passing out. While his vision grew darker and Naruto began to slowly slip into blissful unconsciousness, his struggles, weak as they were at this point, stopped. However, just when he was about to pass out, he felt a new pain that brought him screaming back to consciousness. Naruto tried to look up at the villager only to find that the man had Naruto's neck and lower jaw in a vice-like grip, cruelly grinding the right side of Naruto's face into the cold cement in the process. Eyes darting towards his attacker, Naruto felt his stomach churn nauseously at the twisted grin on the man's face as he stared down on Naruto. The villager giggled in sick glee, a sound that seemed completely at odds with the look of utter hatred and rage on the man's face. "Let's see you try to hide now, you fucking monster." Naruto could just make out the knife handle out of the corner of his peripheral vision. He stared at it in confusion for a moment, still wondering what had caused him such pain to drive the darkness away, before his eyes widened in horrified realization. Naruto barely had time to beg, "Please don't dash," before the man began to brutally cut at his face with a sawing motion, as if he wanted to cut straight through Naruto's cheekbone and come out the other cheek. The pain was horrific, a burning sensation, like someone had pushed red-hot steel across his face and then jerked it back and forth jaggedly. Naruto screamed with everything he had, which was very little at this point as his vision darkened once more, though this time it was a mixture of tears and his own blood that was the cause. As the man lifted the blade from his face, he felt a new pain as the wound was exposed to the air, as if molten steel was poured into the cuts. After a moment that seemed to last for an eternity, the pain subsided to a relatively speaking dull ache. Blinking desperately to try to clear his vision, Naruto could only scream when he heard his assailant cackle. 2 down and 4 to go. Hito brought the blade towards the demon's face, intending to continue his grisly work. There was no room in his enraged mind for anything else at this point, not after everything he had lost over the last 3 years. Hito had at first thought his family lucky in the hours following the Kyuubi's attack. They'd all survived, even his newly promoted Chunin wife Miku, who had been out helping to defend the village. Throughout that terrible night, Hito had hated himself, hated how he was hiding in the safety of the shelters while his beloved Miku was out there fighting, and possibly dying. Even when he gathered the academy students together so their Chunin sensei could join the battle, he hated himself for not being by his wife's side. And he'd never felt as happy as when he was reunited with his darling wife in the aftermath, finding her tired but gloriously alive and unharmed. Even with all of the chaos and the loss of the Yondaime, and so many others, Hito had felt certain that he was blessed by the gods. And then his elder brother Shido had learned the truth behind the Kyuubi's defeat. Hito had been horrified to learn that the demon was not only still alive, but was actually being protected by the Sandaime. What was the old man thinking? Even worse, the Sandaime had actually overruled the council and declared the demon would be allowed to live alongside the rest of the villagers. Hito had fiercely supported his brother's decision to gather the people together to confront the aged Hokage, who had obviously allowed his power to go to his head if he thought he could just do as he pleased despite the council's unanimous objections. He'd even helped spread the word about the demon's attempt to avoid its destruction by hiding in the form of a child. So one could imagine his horror when, instead of uniting behind his brother and the other counselors, the people had turned against them. Rather than being outraged at the Hokage's betrayal of them all, the shinobi had actually arrested Shido, as well as all those counselors who had been helping him. Then, when the Sandaime tyrannically ordered their deaths, the shinobi hadn't hesitated to comply, executing their duly elected leaders without a flicker of remorse. Hitoad had been crushed, unable to believe what was happening before his eyes, even as the Sandaime personally explained his latest law and the consequence for breaking it. Even worse, while Mika mourned with him and supported him through his brother's death, whom he hadn't even been allowed to bury as his body was left for carrion to devour, she actually supported the Hokage. That while she would miss Shido and regretted his passing and the pain it had brought him, she couldn't condemn the Sandaime for enforcing the village's laws. That Shido, however much he might have believed he was doing the right thing, had handled the situation terribly, and had actually committed treason by his actions. Their marriage had barely survived after that, despite the great love they had for one another. It took nearly 2 years of harsh arguments combined with barely seeing Mika as she and the rest of the shinobi were run ragged to get Konoha back on its feet before they had been able to reconcile with each other. Admittedly, it was Mika's near death in an ambush that claimed the lives of several teammates that truly drove home what Hitoad had been about to lose. It also helped that Mika desperately wanted children, nearly as much as Hitoad himself, and even better, Mika's dream job was to be an instructor at the academy, a posting that many other shinobi tried desperately to avoid. With that in mind, Hitoad tried to put Shido's murder behind him, and to ignore the demon child in favor of preparing for his new family, not to mention the frantic practice runs Mika put him through while waiting for her request for paternity leave to go through. For a wonderful few weeks, Hitoad had once again dared to believe he was truly blessed. But slowly, things had become less and less wonderful. While Mika's request for leave had been approved, actually conceiving a child had proven almost ridiculously difficult considering how many accidental pregnancies happened in a hidden village each year. Hitoad had honestly had no clue how difficult it could be to intentionally impregnate a woman. Ironic considering lengths he'd gone through as a young man to avoid just that. Still, a quick trip to the doctor had set their minds at ease. Learning that it wasn't uncommon to take up to a year for a couple to get pregnant the first time had surprised him, as had the doctor's chuckled warning that daily sex could actually decrease their odds of conceiving. Still, while slightly embarrassed to learn that he and Mika might have simply been trying too hard to have a child, Hitoad had been happy. But then a year had come and gone without a pregnancy. And while Mika remained optimistic, Hitoad only grew more and more convinced something was wrong. And then, it occurred to him that Miku, his darling beautiful Miku, had been exposed to the Kyuubi's tainted chakra for hours during the attack. Who knew what effect that could have on a woman? Hitoad had tried to put it out of his mind, had tried telling himself that surely someone would have noticed by now if the Kyuubi's chakra had negatively affected anyone. But he couldn't do it. Over time, he only grew more certain, enough so that he had tearfully confessed his fear to Miku. In turn, Mika had gone looking for answers herself from her kunoichi acquaintances. She'd returned hours later with a relieved smile, joyfully telling him that his fears were for naught, and there had never been any such side effects noted from exposure to demonic chakra. Hitoad himself had been relieved for a moment, before his treacherous mind had reminded him that there had to be a reason for their difficulties in conceiving a child. And worried that Miku had simply been reassured by one of her friends who didn't actually know, Hitoad had asked where she'd gotten her information. Her answer had shocked and horrified him. The Sandaime. She had cheerfully replied, seemingly completely put at ease by what that murderer had told her. Unable to contain his outrage, Hitoad exploded at Miku, calling her a fool among other things, reasserting his belief in the demon child's role in their difficulties. The conversation quickly turned heated after he brought up the demon child, and Hitoad honestly couldn't remember what exactly it was he had said that had set her off, but for some reason, Mika had actually slapped him, before coldly telling him that he understood nothing, least of all about the demon that she insisted on calling poor boy. That was more than he could take. Not after everything that monster had taken from him and his family. So he threw Mika out. Not for good, just so she could have some time to come to her senses and realize the danger that the Kyuubi continued to pose, especially if it was able to keep them from conceiving a child. Hitoad was more than prepared to take her back, and was in fact able to concede that while not in the wrong, some of his words had been unduly harsh to his wife, who he realized must have been terrified at the possibility of being barren because of that monster, and thus simply grasping at straws to try to reassure herself. It hurt him to be away from his beloved Miku, and that pain had led to him drinking more than was probably good for him, but he'd known the pain would only be temporary. After all, they'd gotten over their arguments following Shido's death, surely they would get over this one as well. But as the days turned into weeks and then months, Hitoad began to grow worried when he didn't hear from Miku. So he went looking for her, and growing more worried when he failed to find her at first. She wasn't at any of the places he could usually find her, and most of her friends still weren't talking to him after their fight, so he was truly at wit's end. He finally did find her, of course, though at first he couldn't believe it was actually her. Much to his surprise, when he stumbled into her, he found her pregnant. For a moment he could only stare at her, and then he laughed joyously, rushing forward to engulf her in a hug and kiss her deeply. What a fool he had been, thinking that the QB could actually prevent pregnancy. Even more so when he realized that he must have finally gotten her pregnant just days before their fight. It never occurred to him to wonder why she hadn't told him before now. Just like it never occurred to him that she might avoid his attempt to hug her and convey his joy. Or that she would look at him so coldly as she asked what he wanted. Just like it never occurred to him that she would laugh when he asked why she hadn't told him that she was pregnant, or that she in turn would ask why he thought she would. Just like it never occurred to him that she would tell him that she was just shy of being 4 months along, nor remind him that they hadn't so much as spoken in almost 7 months. Just like it never occurred to him that when he threw her out that day, it was the last straw for her. That he had hurt her so badly and so deeply that she had crawled into a sake bottle and hadn't come out until weeks later, when she had squandered her savings away staying as drunk as she could for as long as she could, leaving her in the streets with nowhere else to go. That is, until another man had found her. The same man that had taken her in as if she were a stray kitten and carefully nursed her back to health and sobriety. The same man she had somehow fallen in love with. The same man she had demanded to marry her. The same man who had laughed before kissing her and asking if she wanted a traditional wedding or not. The same man who had gotten her pregnant on their wedding night. Their first time together. Hitoad couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that he had lost his beloved Miku to another man. He couldn't believe that Miku was actually carrying another man's child. He'd stood there in a daze, desperately wondering where it had all gone wrong for him, even as Miku walked away. And when he saw the demon child dart into an alley, he could no longer stand by and watch as Konoha's greatest enemy walked unpunished through the village. Not after everything the bastard fox had done to him and his family. So he had chased the beast down, and made sure to extract every bit of punishment from the bastard as he could. Marking the demon for what it was only the beginning as far as Hitoad was concerned, as he laid the blade across the screaming bastard's face for a third cut. "Oh God, what the hell are you doing?" a horrified voice shouted. "Hey Naruto, come on!" There were running footsteps. And then 2 young men were dragging him off of the fox child. Hitoad screamed in incoherent rage as he struggled with the 2 interlopers, thrashing from side to side and throwing one of the fools off him, the other holding tightly to his knife hand. Twisting, he delivered a vicious punch, shattering the young redhead's nose with a sickening crunch. Yet the young man didn't relinquish his grip, and seeing the second man getting back to his feet, Hitoad grabbed the redhead by the hair and slammed his head into the alley wall. The man's grip weakened, and Hitoad wrenched his hand free, spinning back and raising his knife overhead to end the fox child once and for all. Then a hand suddenly seized his wrist, the pressure just short of snapping the bone. Simultaneously, an arm wrapped around his neck from behind and yanked him off the ground, dragging him several feet from the fox child. Hitoad snarled and tried to twist free, only to come close to soiling himself when he saw a Usagi-masked Umbu dash past him and scoop the demon into his arms. He let out a slight whimper when Usagi looked up from the thing in his arms to Hitoad, or more specifically, to the other Umbu holding him. "Saru, I'll take Naruto to the hospital. You deal with the traitor and inform Hokage-sama." "Understood," was the grim response that came from behind Hitoad. Hitoad watched as the gray-armored shinobi leapt to the rooftops and dashed off. "Thank you for your assistance in this matter. You have done a great service to Konoha," the voice now identified as Sara said to the 2 interlopers. "If you will wait at the opening of the alley, a medic will be along shortly to tend your injury." The uninjured man nodded as he supported his dazed friend. "Come on, Naruto, let's get you a cloth and some ice for your nose." Naruto nodded woozily as his companion began shuffling him from the alley. "I hope they execute dat chick bastard," the redhead slurred through his broken nose. "What kind of monster does that to a child?" Hitoad wanted to scream at the fools, to tell them about the demon, and his brother, and everything else that monster had taken from him. Then Sara chuckled darkly. "Well, looks like Ibiki is going to have even more fun today." This time Hitoad really did soil himself. Usagi held Naruto as gently as he could while dashing across the rooftops towards the hospital. He hadn't been able to do a very thorough check on Naruto, but his limited first aid skills were more than enough to know that he needed immediate medical attention. Luckily, he had used Tanuki Nairi Jutsu on the boy, otherwise he had no doubt the child would not only still be screaming, but also probably struggling to escape from Usagi, even if he had nothing to fear from the Umbu. Besides, it was very hard to be stealthy when you had a screaming and struggling child with you, and the last thing he needed was someone coming to the child's aid. Whether they were sincere or not didn't really matter at this point. Landing in front of the main hospital, Usagi ran through the doors into the emergency room. Finding the nearest doctor, Usagi made his way across the currently empty room to the desk where the man was conversing with the nurse. The nurse jumped to her feet when she saw the umbu and the unmoving child cradled to his chest, alerting the doctor to Usagi's presence. "What happened?" the man asked as he began to run a diagnostic jutsu on the small child. "He was attacked. I don't know how bad the damage is, but he seems to be having trouble breathing," Usagi responded in clipped tones, trying to maintain a professional attitude in spite of the red-hot rage he felt both at himself and at the bastard who would actually do something like this to a child for no reason. This almost went out the window when the doctor went to examine the lacerations on Naruto's face and got a good look at who the child was. "Fuck!" the doctor hissed, recoiling in disgust from the child. "Get that thing out of here! I won't let this hospital be tainted by that filth." Usagi just stared at him for a moment, honestly indecisive for a moment. On the one hand, the doctors of Konoha had always had the right to refuse any treatments or procedures they considered immoral or unethical. This law was originally put in place so the civilian doctors wouldn't be forced to heal enemy combatants who were set to be tortured for information. It was also meant to appease those who felt it wrong to heal someone set for execution, or to remove healthy organs from prisoners for transplant to leave shinobi. The idea being that doctors wouldn't feel the need to leave the medical practice over the guilt of betraying their own moral beliefs. And with the large number of talented, more understanding medicine that Konoha boasted, such a concession had always seemed rather trivial overall. On the other hand, the law was not meant to allow doctors to refuse treatment based on a grudge or prejudice like this one was doing, even if the man in question didn't see it that way. The problem was that technically, the doctor was within his legal rights, even if he was abusing said rights. Still, Usagi was responsible for Naruto's safety, a mandate given to him by the Sandaime Hokage himself, and he had no doubt that the child needed medical attention. All this flashed through his head during that brief moment, before coming to a decision. "Fuck it," were his thoughts as he channeled chakra to his right hand and grabbed the hand the doctor used to point at Naruto. A series of cracks and snaps were heard when Usagi vindicatively broke the doctor's hand, before snapping his wrist. The doctor screamed in shock and agony before he dropped to his knees, cradling his hand, and looking up at Usagi in disbelief. The scream also drew the attention of a couple of other doctors and a handful of nurses, who came running into the room. They stopped short when they saw one of their own on his knees in front of an umbu with a small child cradled in the assassin's arms. Usagi stepped away from the physician he had disciplined and approached the small group of doctors and nurses. "Well, it's too late to turn back now," he thought with a wry snort and a mental shrug. "This is Naruto Uzumaki," he stated stiffly while holding the child out towards the closer of the two doctors. "He needs immediate medical attention," Usagi finished as he watched for the second doctor's response. The man looked surprised that an umbu was blocking his path to his injured colleague, before he seemed to realize what Usagi had just said. As soon as he did, however, the man's face became resolute. "I'll have nothing to do with it. The Yondaime may be a hero, but creating this thing was unforgivable, even for him. As if it weren't bad enough that the other hidden villages insist on creating such horrible abominations to use as weapons, the Yondaime destroyed that poor child as well? I'm sorry, but I can't condone aiding in the continuation of such barbarism." For a full 30 seconds after his rant, Usagi just stared at the man. "Wrong answer," was all the umbu finally said as he spun in a circle to his left, using his free arm to hit the doctor with the full force of the centrifugal wind-up. It was a very effective technique that utilized the bony part of the lower forearm to hit the target's neck. If performed properly, the hit would land on a spot that forced every muscle in the body to relax for a second or two, good for temporarily stunning an opponent before following up with a more permanent takedown. With as much force as Usagi used, though, the blow flipped the man into a partial cartwheel that ended when the doctor's shoulder connected with the floor, followed by the rest of his now unconscious body. The remaining doctor and the nurses gasped as Usagi returned to his previous position. For a moment, he just stared at them. "I'm not going to say it again," he stated coldly. This seemed to wake the staff from their stupor as the doctor rushed to take the child while a couple of nurses grabbed a gurney for him to place the thankfully still sleeping child on. Glancing at the two physicians on the floor as well as the trio of nurses who stayed behind to help them, Usagi couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. His actions would not go unpunished, that was for sure. Other hidden villages might tolerate, or even encourage such behavior from their shinobi to their civilians, but Konoha most certainly did not. At least, not for something like this. Looking down the hallway at his young charge, he felt a strange sense of determination. What he did was wrong yet at the same time right. Walking back past the two former doctors, Usagi went to a water cooler that was set against the wall. Reaching down to the levers, he hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should even bother to take the time. Oh, why not? He decided as he stood back up. Heading back to his charge, Usagi snorted when he passed the downed physicians. Don't even bother. He ordered amusedly to the trio of nurses who remained with the now injured/unconscious doctors, while forming a series of hand seals. On the last seal, the water in the cooler began to churn chaotically before the plastic container suddenly exploded, spilling water everywhere, which then began to rise up in two places until they formed perfect copies of Usagi. Whoops, he thought sarcastically as the rest of the water left over from his jutsu drained out of the jug. Continuing down the hall, he chuckled aloud. Ibiki will be so happy. He's already received 2 playthings today, and now I'm giving him 2 more. The nurses gasped as the Mizu Bunshin grabbed the doctors and shined away. Despite the severity of the situation, Usagi couldn't resist whistling a merry tune. So what if he put the fear of God into them? Maybe that would remind them that the liberties given to them were just that. Catching up to his charge and the staff moving him into one of the many rooms on this floor, Usagi took up a position near the door as the doctors there's 2 of them now worked on Naruto. Usagi would remain in the corner until the Hokage arrived, as was the protocol decided for this kind of situation. Usagi flinched slightly as he thought about that little fact. The Sandaime would not be pleased with today's events, that was for sure. Sarutobi frowned as he tapped his finger on his desk. Naruto had been hospitalized. Hospitalized. He growled just thinking about it. A barely 3.5-year-old should not be in the hospital with 2 broken ribs and a punctured lung. The child had also received a few minor injuries, including a broken nose, which had been easily set, and a pair of deep cuts on the left side of his face that were not so easily healed. Or at least, not enough to remove the scars that now covered 2 of his birthmarks. As if Naruto needs something else to make him stand out. Sarutobi thought bitterly. Sarutobi had some satisfaction in knowing that the last few days the former merchant Hitoad would be agonizing to say the least. Still, that was nowhere near enough to make up for the knowledge that he had failed Naruto once again. How many times have I failed you now? First, the fiasco with the council, then those ignorant fools at the orphanage, and now this. Sarutobi mused grimly. Perhaps I need to increase Naruto's security detail? No, they've done an excellent job of keeping him safe. This attack probably happened by chance. The usual Umbu details had always been more than enough to deter or intercept any attacks and were loyal enough to follow their Hokage's orders to the letter. In the streets at least. He still couldn't forgive himself for what the caretakers at the orphanage had done to Naruto, or his failure to foresee it. Oh, Sarutobi knew that logically there was no way he could have known that not only would a caretaker at an orphanage neglect or abuse Naruto, but that almost the entirety of the other workers either took part in it, or turned a blind eye to the abuse. Nor could he blame the Umbu for not suspecting it either. After all, it takes a very paranoid and jaded person to consider that without some kind of proof, and as Sarutobi himself had selected that orphanage, it was likely the Umbu assumed those within had already been vetted by him. An assumption that Sarutobi knew would have been true, if he hadn't allowed himself to get so distracted in the months following the Kyuubi's attack. Still, that didn't make him feel any less guilty about it. Even after 3 days of interrogations, Ibiki still couldn't provide a complete picture of just what went on in that orphanage when Sarutobi wasn't around. What he did know was more than enough to cause restless nights filled with guilt and doubt. Constant isolation, regularly skipped meals, and verbal abuse were all confirmed, with others merely suspected. The real question was just how bad it was. Hopefully, once the current situation was resolved, Ibiki would be able to finish the investigation into the orphanage, and if there was any decency in the world, that would be the extent of the mistreatment. Sighing, he picked up the Umbu report from the hospital incident involving Usagi. Something he could admit to having mixed feelings on. Skimming over it once again, Sarutobi spoke to the seemingly empty office. Bring me Usagi. Hi, Hokage-sama, was the soft-spoken reply, as the telltale smoke from a shunshin dispersed in the shadows. Sarutobi knew what he would have to do, as much as he didn't want to. Looking up, he watched as Usagi appeared silently before him. You summoned me, Hokage-sama? The masked Umbu asked with a salute. Sarutobi gestured to a chair in front of his desk. Please have a seat, Usagi. We have much to discuss. He opened one of his drawers and retrieved some tobacco for his pipe. Lighting it, he took a few calming puffs while studying Usagi. You do know why you're here, don't you, Usagi? It was more a statement than a question. I can take a guess, Hokage-sama, the Umbu replied stoically. Sarutobi sighed. Despite your excellent mission record and your unwavering loyalty, I cannot overlook your actions at the hospital. On the one hand, I applaud you for what you did for young Naruto. However, Konoha has never been a place where civilians must fear their protectors. What you did, however well-intentioned, was intimidation, pure and simple. He paused to observe the young man in front of him. There was a sense of resignation in the Umbu's body language. No doubt he knew from the beginning that his actions would result in this. That he went through with them anyway would be admirable in other circumstances. Using your skills to needlessly attack and intimidate the very people who you have sworn to defend is unacceptable. If you were any other ninja, you would only receive a severe fine for this. However, you are not any other ninja, you are Umbu, one of my personal shinobi. Your actions will always reflect not only on Konoha, but on me as well. As such, more than any other ninja, you are expected to maintain discipline and professionalism. Sarutobi paused for a moment, and then asked, "Tell me, Usagi, why didn't you simply seek out another doctor? Why did you feel that assaulting your own comrades was acceptable? Should I have let Naruto die then?" Usagi retorted heatedly. Those doctors were abusing their power to satisfy their own hatred or even their political beliefs. What else should I have done? You could have taken Naruto to the Umbu medics, Sarutobi said quietly. You could have invoked my name to coerce the nurses to at least stabilize Naruto while you found a doctor or medic need for him. Such was certainly within their abilities. Or Sarutobi paused once again to level a stern look on Usagi and added some bite to his tone. You could have retrieved Todo-sensei from his office, not 20 feet from where you were standing. You remember Todo-sensei, don't you? He was the second doctor you found aiding Naruto when you returned from your showboating with your Mizu Bunshin in the lobby. Sarutobi allowed his voice to grow more heated as he went on, taking notice of Usagi's flinch. He is also the doctor who has seen to Naruto's medical needs since he was barely a month old. Surely as one of my elite shinobi, you were capable of moving 20 feet before your charge died? Sarutobi scoffed tiredly and looked to the file on his desk once again. It never even occurred to you to find another doctor, did it? You allowed your anger, both at yourself for what happened to Naruto, and at the doctors who exercised their rights, to blind you to any other possible course of action. Rather than choosing to accept their refusals and search for another means of completing your objective, you instead decided that only they would be acceptable, and you acted to force them to act as you wished. Still, I understand that you acted in what you felt were the best interests of Naruto, so there will be no fines for you. That said, I cannot allow you to remain in the Umbu either. A slight tightening of his fists was Usagi's only outward reaction to this news. I understand, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi nodded. Turn in your mask and your Umbu uniform to the quartermaster. I've already informed your captain of your discharge. Report back in 3 days for reassignment. Hi, Hokage-sama. The now former Umbu stood and saluted for what would be the final time as an Umbu operative. As he turned to leave, the Hokage spoke up again. By the way. Usagi turned back to his leader in time to catch a small scroll. Blinking at the scroll in confusion, he looked back to the Hokage, who was now smiling ever so slightly. You've been a Chunin for some time now, ever since you were recruited for the Umbu 4 years ago. I believe it's about time for a promotion, don't you? The Sandaime chuckled. After all, your skills are more than sufficient for your new rank, and you possess the leadership qualities necessary when you choose to actually use them. You'll find both your promotion paperwork and your new vest in that scroll. Congratulations, Special Jounin Genma Shirani. Genma bowed to the Hokage, feeling more than slightly bewildered. Thank you, Hokage-sama. As he left, Genma let out a slightly forced chuckle as he shifted his mask just enough to expose one corner of his mouth. Well, that wasn't so bad. Sticking the end of a senbon in his mouth, he left to complete his discharge from Umbu. He'd expected a hefty punishment for harming those doctors, though he didn't expect to be discharged for it. Nor did he expect a lecture the likes of which he hadn't received in quite a long time. Though looking back with the benefit of hindsight, the Hokage was right. Self-righteous bastards those 2 doctors might have been, Genma didn't need to punish them to get Naruto treatment. He certainly shouldn't have even wasted the time it took to do so, not when his charge's life was on the line. Most of the nurses there were young enough to be easily persuaded by an imposing Umbu to do as he asked, and logically speaking, the odds of getting 2 doctors who refused to help Naruto in a row were about the same as being struck by lightning after winning a lottery. Or about the same as Tsunade Senju getting a royal flush in a game of poker. So Genma could admit that he'd overreacted, which in turn led to him screwing up pretty badly in more than one way. Still, he was more or less satisfied with how everything had turned out. On the one hand, he was getting a little tired of Umbu missions, and he got a free promotion out of it. On the other hand, he was going to see a serious pay decrease. Not to mention having to interact with a new team that more than likely wouldn't be as experienced as him, seeing as how he had Umbu training. Still, his punishment could have been a lot worse, really. No, despite the shitty start this day had had, the ending wasn't so bad. Well, not as bad as it could have been. Whistling as he strolled out of the Hokage Tower, Genma thought about his new promotion in a more positive light. I wonder how the ladies will like my new vest? Hehehe, Moritaki's bar, here I come. Yes, not that bad a day at all. 7 months later. Konohagakure no Sato was a study in contrasts in many ways. Almost since their founding, Konoha had preached of the will of fire and the importance of teamwork. That each of Konoha's shinobi, each leaf if you will, while incapable of sustaining the great tree itself, was nonetheless as equally important as the countless other leaves, that only by all of the leaves working together could the great tree grow truly strong and prosperous. As such, the shinobi of Konoha were expected to work with their teammates under the guidance of their Jounin sensei to improve their skills and strengths, to cover one another's weaknesses and push each other to their full potential. The strengthening of their teams would strengthen their squads, which in turn would strengthen their platoons, etc., etc. The end result being the hidden village that had weathered each of the great shinobi wars and come out in a position of relative strength time and again. Konoha had actually won the third great shinobi war, a claim that none of the other villages could make. Yet in reality, few of Konoha's teams actually demonstrated that belief. Oh, they worked together almost flawlessly much of the time, and many Konoha shinobi saw their teammates as family in all but blood. But at the same time, few teams were actually equal amongst themselves. The Sandame's teammates, while powerful and skilled jounin in their own rights, were certainly not on the same level of the shinobi no kami, even during their prime. Nor were the Yandame's teammates ever able to match his abilities, even as a genin. In fact, the only two teams that could be said to have come even close to meeting the standards were the Sannin, who were all extremely powerful individually and even more powerful as a team, covering one another's few weaknesses, and the far lesser example of the Ino Shikacho team, which, while nowhere near as powerful as the Sannin, was a team whose ability to work together and succeed against all odds was the source of their legend. Beyond that, despite the Sandame often describing Konoha as a family, when the legendary Tsukumo Hatake abandoned a mission of extreme importance whose failure many attributed to sparking off the Third Great Shinobi War in order to save his teammates, Konoha almost universally turned against him, including those very teammates he had saved. Teammates that Konoha had always claimed should have been like family to Tsukumo. And this wasn't a brief moment of ridicule and a moment of anger either. Tsukumo was shunned and hated by the village as a whole for months, to the point that the man, Konoha's legendary White Fang who overshadowed even the Sannin, fell into a depression and killed himself. And yet when the man's son, Kakashi Hatake, abandoned an equally crucial mission to save his teammates years later during the very same war his father was blamed for starting, the village of Konoha all but idolized him for it. Kakashi was even held up as an example by Konoha as a true follower of the will of fire, of a shinobi the village could be proud of. All of this despite the fact that were it not for the intervention of Minato Namikaze himself, the crucial mission would have been a failure and Konoha could very well have lost the war. Beyond Konoha's belief system was its contrasting layout and design itself. As the hidden village with the largest population among the Great Five, Konoha's layout was at once sprawling and cluttered. Wide streets allowed for easy flow of traffic, both foot and mounted, while countless alleys crisscrossed the village with little to no order or purpose. Indeed, while some alleys served the purpose of connecting streets, many others were dead ends, or doubled back to the very street one had just left. In fact, few if any of Konoha's actual citizens could claim to know the layout of Konoha's alleys with complete certainty. Which was actually the point, designed as it was to confuse and disorient any invaders who actually managed to breach the walls in any meaningful force. During the day, the streets were filled to the brim with both travelers and locals going about their lives with an industrious determination that would make ants envious. Once the sun had set, however, much of Konoha would almost appear to be a ghost town to the untrained eye. With the exception of places such as bars and restaurants, most of the businesses were closed and sat empty. Those who would normally work or frequent such establishments were at home with their families, attending meals or seeing to whatever household chores remained. As the night wore on, those families would retire to bed, leaving much of the village darkened and seemingly deserted save for the occasional patrolling KMP officers who were seen only so they could act as a visible deterrent to any would-be criminals, while many other shinobi darted about unseen as they patrolled the sleeping village. If an untrained observer happened to be watching this particular night, they'd be treated to a strange sight. Within one of the seemingly pointless and abandoned alleyways, two shadows carefully and discreetly made their way in from the street as if searching for someone. No sooner did they arrive than a third shadowy figure seemed to emerge from the surrounding darkness with only the slightest whisper of sound from his cloak. At the appearance of this newcomer, the first two shadows took guarded stances, wary of a possible ambush or betrayal. The taller of the two stood about 5'10", with a body type that seemed to be that of a former athlete, still strong, but no longer at the peak it once was. The second was a half-foot shorter and seemed to be all wiry flesh on top of bone. Despite this, they still stood with the casual grace of leopards, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. All that could be seen of the third party was a white glint from under the hood of their black full-body robe. Judging by their size, one could assume the robed figure was most likely male. However, in the ninja world, not only can appearances be deceiving, they usually are. Have you considered our offer? The taller of the two shadows questioned in a deep baritone. There was no response from the newcomer. You know this is in the village's best interest, the man continued slowly, as if driving a point home that he wanted to be sure was considered. If we don't act now, there might never be another chance. We can only fool the Hokage for so long. Eventually he will uncover our motives and crush us. If that happens, he will never lower his guard again. You know this must be done. For a moment, the sound of the wind was the only answer, and the shadowed couple feared complete failure. Then a whispered "very well" drifted from beneath the edge of the hood. The older man spoke again determinedly. All right then, we'll act in 2 days. Remember the plan and be prepared. No matter what else happens, he must die. As soon as those final, deliberate words were spoken, the pair seemingly vanished from view. As the moon slowly appeared from behind the clouds, the lone shadow stepped out of the alley, a small amount of light penetrating the depths of their hood to reveal the white porcelain of an umbu mask, before the assassin darted away as well. The morning sun slowly drifted in through the window of a child's room. As the light reached the bed, it covered the face of a small, 4-year-old boy. Scrunching up his face, said boy attempted to bury himself in his covers and reclaim the bliss of sleep. Alas, this was not to be, as the voice of an elderly woman echoed up the stairs. Naruto-chan. Breakfast in 10 minutes. Grumbling, Naruto eventually tumbled out of bed. Stumbling to his dresser, Naruto began to dress himself before a picture frame caught his eye. The picture was small and contained a trio of old people and one small blonde-haired child. Naruto smiled happily as he finished dressing. Why was he so happy, you may ask? For no other reason than that another beautiful day was about to start, and he was loved by his grandparents. An added bonus was that the feeling that he could only compare to being watched was gone today, and that was a rare treat for him. Naruto thought back to what his life was once like. Back before his grandparents came and took him away from the orphanage, his life had been very different. Back then, he had lived in almost constant fear. Some of his first memories involving human contact had been of harsh words screamed at him by one of his caretakers, words that he had been too young to understand at the time, and had all but forgotten since, but the anger and rage behind them had been all too understood even at that age. Of course, in a way he craved those moments, brief as they were, simply because he wasn't alone. The rest of his time had been dominated by being locked in his room away from the other children, or anyone else for that matter. The only break in his isolation had come from the meals that he had been given every so often and the semi-occasional slap. Usually the only time he would be allowed out was to wash and use the bathroom. The exception to this had been whenever the person he dubbed Old Man had come around. For some reason on those occasions, the caretakers would bring him out, bathe him, and make sure he was presentable, whatever that meant, and put him in the visitation room. Then the old man would come in and spend some time with him, play a few games and read a storybook or two, before leaving again. He could still remember his first encounter with the old man. Flashback. Naruto was hustled into a room he'd never been in before, what he would later learn was called the visitation room, by a strangely anxious man. Looking up at the tall brunette caretaker, whose name he had never learned, Naruto asked, "What we do?" The middle-aged man looked down at him and somewhat nervously grunted, "Just shut up and do what you're told. You better be on your best behavior for the Hokage, or else no food for a week." Naruto just nodded his head quickly, keeping such questions as "what's a Hokage" to himself. He'd learned to avoid asking questions when possible. Then he was left alone in the room. A few minutes later, the door opened again and a man walked in. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile, something that Naruto had never seen before that he could remember. While short for an adult, he still towered above little Naruto, and was dressed in red and white robes and wore a funny-looking hat. What really caught his attention, though, was that the man was old. Intrigued, Naruto barely registered when the visitor greeted him. "Hello Naruto-chan, how are you?" the man asked kindly. Naruto just stared at him curiously for a moment before simply stating, "You're old." The man just burst out laughing, a sound that seemed to soothe Naruto's soul and gave him a warm feeling. Smiling, Naruto picked up a nearby ball and brought it to the Hokage. "Wanna play?" Naruto asked shyly as he held up the toy. His new friend smiled as he ruffled Naruto's hair. End flashback. From that day forth, the Hokage would always be simply Old Man to Naruto. The isolation, erratic feeding schedules, and verbal abuse had continued until Naruto was 3, when he finally found the courage and the vocal skill to ask the nice old man who visited him about it. Surprisingly, the old man had gotten really angry when he told him about it, though for the first time, though most of the surprise came from the fact that the anger wasn't directed at him. Naruto didn't really remember what happened after the old man had done something with his hands because he had gotten real sleepy, but when he had woken up most of the caretakers had been gone. When Naruto asked what had happened, the old man had just smiled sort of sadly at him and promised that everything would be better from then on. And in a way, it was. While the new caretakers never locked him up like the old ones had done, and they always fed him an enormous amount of food every day, they were still really mean and didn't talk to him much, except to tell him to get out during the day and to make sure to be back before nightfall. What was strange was that several times, the door would be locked when he returned even if the sun was still up, and no amount of knocking would get it open though. Oddly enough, whenever he fell asleep outside, he'd wake up back in his bed in the orphanage. Also odd was how that stopped happening after a few more of the caretakers went away. But that was often pushed to the back of his mind by another realization. It was scary outside. While the previous caretakers had been really mean to him, in a way they were nothing compared to the villagers. Most of the time they just looked at him with these really angry eyes. Other times they would seem to ignore him no matter what he did. The worst was the way some people would yell and scream like he did something wrong. Whenever he asked what he did, people would seem to get even angrier. Every so often, someone would even try to hit him as well. Most of the time, he was able to run away from these people and somehow lose them in the crowds, or the people yelling at him would suddenly fall over, and one time a man had just disappeared right in front of his eyes. Only once, when he escaped from one villager just to run into another a block or so away, did anyone cause him actual physical harm. He was sure that a passing umbu was the only reason he had survived that encounter, and he still had nightmares about alleys and an angry man with a knife from time to time. He even had 2 prominent scars on his left cheek as a permanent reminder of that day. He grimaced when he thought about that. The scars covered his top left birthmark and the middle left one, leaving just the bottom one untouched. That time had easily been the worst moment of his life. Still, as horrible and terrifying as the outside could sometimes be, at least he could come and go as he pleased, unlike at the orphanage. In fact, once he learned to be careful and to draw as little attention as possible, as in, don't talk to anyone if he could avoid it, and stay out of sight, the looks and sneers became almost non-existent. Eventually, the number of incidents dropped to the point where he actually had to concentrate to remember the last one, only happening when he got lost in thought or stopped paying attention to his surroundings and bumped into someone, although even that became rarer. The fact that he could rarely shake that feeling of being watched added to this. What was strange is that even though that feeling had been proven right many times, it was almost always there, including when he was alone. How was that even possible? Still, strange or not, it had helped him to eventually learn how to avoid most of the dangers outside the orphanage, even if it was only accomplished through a near constant state of fear and paranoia. Then came the day that was the turning point in his short life. Just 6 short months ago, the old man came back to see him at the orphanage, only this time, he wasn't alone. With him were a man and woman who looked like they were almost as old as the old man was. Flashback. Naruto, the old man said gently, these are Takashi and Sasuke Sanada. They've expressed an interest in adopting you. At first, he didn't understand. What they were saying and what his caretakers had always told him were 2 completely different things. They wanted to adopt him? No one wanted to adopt him. Not even the old man, the only one who had ever been nice to him, had wanted to adopt him. Not that he could blame him, of course, seeing as how he was a little monster. He was just glad that the old man treated him nicely. How come? He asked curiously, causing the old man and the Sanadas to frown slightly. What do you mean, Naruto-chan? Takashi asked. Naruto tilted his head to the side. Nobody wants me cause I'm a monster, so why you? Sasuke made a tsk-ing sound before scooping him up and setting him on her lap. Naruto-chan, you are not a monster. You're an adorable little boy who has been treated very unfairly. Takashi and I want to help you, and give you the childhood you deserve. Takashi nodded with a smile. She's right, Naruto-chan, we wish to adopt you because you deserve a better life, and we would like to be the ones to give you one. Naruto didn't believe them at first, looking to the old man for reassurance. The old man knelt in front of him and gently put his hand on Naruto's head. It's true, Naruto. They really want you to become a part of their family. I promise you, they will love you and take care of you. Naruto looked up at the old man's gentle and kind smile. Naruto knew he could believe the old man, but he just couldn't wrap his head around the idea that someone actually wanted to be with him. The Sanadas were old, true, but they still weren't the old man, so why would they want to be with him? Even the old man didn't want to be around him all the time. Even as the old man and the Sanadas filled out all of the necessary paperwork to officially adopt him, Naruto tried to figure out why. Outside of the old man, no adult had ever wanted to be around Naruto, so the idea that these two old people would just decide that they wanted him to actually live with them as part of their family was new. That adults were supposed to always be right, but the only adults who were ever nice to him were the old man and now, the Sonatas. Maybe you got to be really old before you stopped being so mean? After all, most of the caretakers were pretty young, and they were all really mean. He was broken out of his musings by Takashi's baritone voice. Naruto. The elderly man kneeled down in front of him again. As he looked up, Naruto was surprised to find that at some point he had hidden himself behind the old man's leg. Peering around his robes, Naruto looked to Takashi as he held out his hand. Would you like to go get something to eat before we show you your new home? Takashi asked as Sasuke came around and placed her hand on his shoulder. We can go anywhere you like, Sasuke added gently. Naruto chewed his lip uncertainly, before looking up at the old man. It's alright, Naruto. I'll come with you and show you that you have nothing to be afraid of. Looking to Takashi and Sasuke, the old man nodded and let Sasuke scoop Naruto into her arms. Now, where should we go eat, Naruto-chan? What's your favorite food? Sasuke asked cheerfully as she carried Naruto out of the orphanage for the last time, with Takashi and the old man following. Naruto shifted uncomfortably, unused to being carried like this, before Sasuke smiled reassuringly at him. Don't be afraid, Naruto-chan, go ahead and put your arms around my neck. I promise I won't bite. Slowly lifting his arms, Naruto uncertainly placed them around the woman's neck. As she shifted him in her arms so his head was nestled on her shoulder, Naruto couldn't help but notice that it felt different being in her arms than it did when the old man hugged him. Maybe you had to get to know someone before you could get that feeling? Or maybe it was because Sasuke felt like she was all bone. Curious about that, Naruto shyly asked, Sasuke-san, how come you feel so bony? For a brief, terrifying moment, Naruto thought he saw something in her eyes. Something that scared him down to his core. Before he had a chance to figure out what he was seeing, he blinked, and whatever he thought he saw was gone, leaving Naruto to wonder if he actually saw anything at all. Well, Naruto-chan, Sasuke started, it's just the way I am. The older I get, the bonier I get. But you really shouldn't ask people things like that. It's rude and you might hurt their feelings doing that. Oh. Naruto didn't really understand her explanation. Really, it just left him wanting to ask why again. Then again, maybe the reason she didn't answer him was because he hurt her feelings? That just made Naruto feel terrible. After all, he knew from experience that feelings could hurt just as bad as scrapes and bruises. When he realized that he might have hurt her feelings, after she had been so nice to him, it made Naruto feel even worse. Shrinking in on himself, Naruto tried to think of how he could make this right. He remembered seeing kids in the park being kissed by their moms and they always seemed to feel better afterward. Maybe that would work for Sasuke-san's feelings? Then again, he never saw any of those kids kissing their moms, so maybe it only worked one way? Desperate to show that he wasn't a monster and that he didn't mean to hurt her feelings, Naruto decided to just give it a try. Leaning in a little closer, he laid a kiss on Sasuke-san's cheek. I'm sorry. Naruto mumbled wretchedly. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, Sasuke-san. I promise I won't ask again. Sasuke looked surprised as she stopped in the street. That's alright, Naruto-chan, you didn't hurt my feelings. You were just curious, that's all. You just need to be careful to make sure you don't accidentally hurt someone. And you don't have to be so formal with me either. We're family now, so please call me Obacon. Naruto blushed slightly and buried his head back in her shoulder, but not before shyly stammering, alright, Sasuke Obacon. Looking over her shoulder, he saw Takashi Sar Takashi Ojaizen looking at Sasuke Obacon and him with a smile before turning back to his conversation with the old man, something about the kind of wood that made the best pipes or something. It seemed pretty boring to Naruto, but the old man sure looked excited though. So Naruto-chan, you never told me what your favorite food was. Sasuke Obacon asked as they approached a nice-looking restaurant. I like ice cream, Naruto offered. After all, ice cream was one of the best treats ever, as long as you didn't eat it too fast. Then it just hurt really bad. Takashi Ojaizen laughed as he joined the conversation. Well, maybe we can get you some for dessert. But you'll have to make sure you eat all your vegetables. Naruto blinked owlishly. My what? Flashback ends. It took some time to get used to his new life, but finally he was truly content with his life, and while the rest of the village still treated him pretty much the same, he could now proudly say that he had a family and a home to call his own. The icing on the cake was that his Ojaizen and Obacon had been ninja when they were younger. Takashi Ojaizen had even started teaching him how to throw kunai and shuriken, though he was real stingy about it and wouldn't let him use any real ones. Takashi also taught him this neat trick to make a leaf float, though Naruto thought the trick with pulling a coin out of his ear was better. even if his Ojaizen refused to tell him how he did that. Flashback. Naruto was sitting in the backyard, attempting to work on his letters. He had come quite far since Susukyo Bacon first sat him down and began explaining how to tell all the different letters apart. That was the easy part, and had only taken him about a month to accomplish. The hard part was learning how to draw them. Still, he was making quite a deal of progress now that he had an actual teacher instead of sneaking glances at the books of other orphans. Especially since most of those books had been far too advanced for a 3-year-old. However, he was still a 3-year-old, so he was quickly growing bored. Thankfully, he could always count on his Ojaizen to liven things up a bit. Naruto, come here for a moment. Speak of the devil. Naruto jumped to his feet excitedly. Hi, Ojaizen. Takashi Ojaizen ruefully shook his head at him. Naruto-chan, if you're going to be a ninja, you're going to have to learn how to be a little quieter. Naruto pouted and crossed his arms. I can be plenty quiet when I want to, Ojaizen. Just you wait, I'll be a great ninja someday. Of course, Naruto's declaration might have sounded more convincing if he hadn't shouted it. Takashi Ojaizen chuckled warmly. I'm sure you will, Naruto-chan. Now let me show you a little trick. He plucked a leaf from the small tree they were sitting under. Are you gonna teach me the coin trick now? Huh? Are ya? Are ya? Naruto jumped up and down excitedly. Yes, coin trick, here I come. Naruto could already see it. The other kids would flock to see the amazing ninja Naruto Uzumaki, master of the disappearing coin. He cackled evilly while rubbing his hands together. No, Naruto, I have something else to teach you. Slumping in disappointment, he nevertheless watched curiously as Takashi Ojaizen placed the leaf in the center of his palm. Suddenly the leaf lifted 2 or 3 inches off his palm and began spinning in a circle. Naruto's eyes widened for a moment, while he thought about learning this trick. He could see it. The other kids would flock to see the amazing ninja Naruto Uzumaki, master of the floating leaf. Yeah, right, that just sounded lame. Naruto pouted. Ojaizen. That's boring. Teach me the coin trick, that's way cooler. Takashi Ojaizen just chuckled and shook his head. Now, Naruto, you can't be a great ninja with just cool moves. Besides, this will help you when you join the academy. Naruto crossed his arms and turned away, stomping his foot. No! I want to learn the coin trick. Takashi Ojaizen sighed and closed his eyes, taking deep breaths, seeming to be deep in thought. Takashi Ojaizen always said he was meditating to help him think whenever he did this. Naruto didn't understand how deep breaths helped someone think, but that's what Takashi Ojaizen always said when Naruto asked. Naruto thought furiously himself, trying to will Takashi Ojaizen to give in to his demands. Come on, coin trick, teach me the coin trick. I promise if I get to learn the coin trick I'll never complain about vegetables again, well, not for a while anyway. Then he saw Takashi Ojaizen smirking as he opened his eyes. I'll tell you what, Naruto, if you can learn this exercise I'll let you start learning how to throw kunai and shuriken. How's that? Naruto's eyes widened at this. I'll get to play with kunai and shuriken? Yes. Awesome. Okay. What are we waiting for? Let's get started, come on. Naruto was practically vibrating with excitement. Alright, Naruto, calm down and listen. Once Takashi Ojaizen finished his explanation on chakra, he put the leaf in his hand and explained the leaf floating exercise. For his part, Naruto tuned out most of the lecture, too busy thinking about how awesome a ninja he was going to be. Hey, kunai are so cool, I'ma be a awesome ninja, and once I get this leaf thingy down, I'll be able to get kunai and shuriken. I'll be so great, Dad Ojaizen will beg to teach me the coin trick. Naruto returned his attention to Takashi Ojaizen just in time to hear, and that is what chakra is. Now in order to float the leaf you have to. A few minutes later and Naruto was ready to give the leaf exercise a try. Right. I'll have this down in no time, Ojaizen. Naruto cheered as he jumped up and down while trying to grab a leaf off one of the lowest branches. Sadly, said branch was still a full foot above Naruto's outstretched hand. But this didn't slow him in the slightest, and he jumped again and again and again. Sticking his tongue between his teeth, Naruto backed up, prepared to try a running start this time. Before he could begin his master plan, however, his Ojaizen grabbed him by the waist and hoisted him up to his target branch. Pouting, Naruto snatched a leaf from the tree, sullenly stating, I would've gotten it. I know, Naruto, but this way you won't tire yourself out, Takashi Ojaizen said gently. Now go ahead and give it a try. Right. Naruto said excitedly as he placed the leaf in the center of his palm. Taking a deep breath, Naruto stared at the leaf and nothing happened. A few minutes passed and nothing happened. A twitch began to form on Naruto's forehead as he stared at the leaf. Finally he snapped, Ojaizen. Nothing's happening. Try using more chakra, was the patient reply. Frowning, Naruto focused everything he had on that leaf. Just when he was about to give up, the leaf shot out of his hand, spinning wildly, before falling to the earth. Naruto stared wide-eyed for a moment, shocked that he'd actually done it, before grinning and spinning to face Takashi. I did it, Ojaizen. I did it, I did it. Takashi Ojaizen just laughed. Not quite, Naruto. You were supposed to make the leaf spin just above your hand, not blast it off into space. When Naruto pouted, he continued his explanation. You need to find the right amount of chakra to spin the leaf, without sending it flying. Just keep trying and I know you'll get it in no time. Naruto beamed at the praise and grabbed the leaf again. Flashback ends. It had taken over a month, but Naruto had been able to master the leaf floating exercise. More than once, he had thought about giving up on the whole thing in frustration. After all, what kind of ninja ever needs to float a leaf? All he needed was some kunai, and he'd be an awesome ninja. Oh, and some neat shuriken too. But he had persevered, and one day he finally mastered the technique. Flashback. Ojaizen. Ojaizen. I did it, I got it to work right. Naruto yelled excitedly as he ran into the kitchen where the old man was talking with his grandparents. Look, look! He demanded, holding up his hand with a leaf in it. Susukio Bacon clapped her hands excitedly when the leaf spun at just the right speed and height as Ojaizen and the old man who was visiting today smiled at the sight. Very good, Naruto. Takashi Ojaizen said while the old man added kindly, I'm amazed at your progress, Naruto. Most children wait until the academy before learning this exercise. Naruto beamed at the praise from his family. Truly, he never felt as happy as when his grandparents and the old man were proud of him. It was the greatest feeling in the world to him. Nothing could make this moment any better. Naruto gasped in realization. Yes. He screamed at the top of his impressive lungs, actually startling his audience. Now I get to play with kunai, just like you promised, Ojaizen. It suddenly got really quiet as Naruto watched his Obacon's face started to turn red. Without warning, Naruto found himself in the old man's arms being whisked out of the kitchen and through the living room to the door. Old man, where are we going? Naruto asked curiously. For a moment he could have sworn he heard the old man mutter, to the nearest bomb shelter. Huh! Was Naruto's intelligent response. Looking over the old man's shoulder he saw his Obacon slowly advancing on his Ojaizen who, for some reason, was backed into a corner and waving his hands defensively. The old man coughed somewhat sheepishly, drawing his attention away from his grandparents. What do you say we go to the park for a while, Naruto-kun? Naruto blinked in thought for a moment. On the one hand, his Ojaizen was supposed to start teaching him how to throw kunai like he promised. On the other hand, the old man didn't visit often, and it had been a while since they went to the park. It didn't take him long to reach a decision. Sure! He chirped happily. After all, the kunai could wait until tomorrow, and the old man was here now. Flashback end. His Obacon had also started teaching him a little bit about cooking and eating healthy while he helped her prepare supper. Though, help was such a generous term to apply to Naruto's enthusiastic efforts. Still, Naruto did wish she'd stop making him eat those nasty green things that she insisted were good for him. She also made him take these pills every morning called Vitamans. The hardest part of adjusting to his new life was learning which words were okay to use and which weren't. Susukio Bacon got real mad the first time he swore in her presence, not that he had understood what the words meant at the time, as he was just repeating words he'd heard from the caretakers and villagers. Flashback. It was raining that day, so Naruto was stuck inside, and he had been forbidden from playing with kunai in the house. The old man had come by for a visit again, though those were starting to become less frequent, much to Naruto's disappointment. Naruto was staring sullenly out the window at the rain that was trapping him inside. His grandparents and the old man were sitting around the coffee table drinking tea and talking about boring old people stuff. Feeling frustrated, Naruto sealed his doom. Fucking rain. He sighed in annoyance. Not 1 second after he finished, Naruto heard a gasp from behind him. Turning around, he was greeted by 2 fearful old men. Naruto Sanada! His Obacon barked as she rose to her feet. At that exact moment, Takashi Ojaizen jumped to his feet and ran to the nearest window shouting, "Every man for himself!" As he jumped out the now open window. Not a second later the old man disappeared in a poof of smoke. Had Naruto been outside and had he had the proper skills, he would have noticed a trio of male Anbu running for their lives. He also might have seen a Soul, Hebe masked female Anbu who stayed behind, muttering pussies at the retreating males. Turning to question his Obeiken, Naruto felt a hand grab his ear and twist. Ow 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 ow. He yelped until he looked up at his Obeiken. When he did, his protests died off with a terrified squeak. Where his Obeiken once stood was now a giant, eyes glowing with demonic fury. Dragging him by his ear, Sasuke Obeiken made her way to the downstairs bathroom and sat him down on the toilet. Stay right there, Naruto Sanada. She growled as she began to fill the tub with water. Oh, she only says my name like that when I'm in big trouble. Naruto eyed the door, wondering if he was fast enough to get away. That all ended when Sasuke Obeiken got up and firmly closed the door. Turning back to him, Sasuke Obeiken presented him with a bar of soap. Open up, she instructed firmly. Naruto blinked. Wa was as far as he got before he found the bar shoved into his mouth. MMPH, trying to protest, Naruto somehow found his head underwater. He could feel his Obeiken's hand on the back of his head, and a moment later, her other hand began to shove the soap around the insides of his mouth. A few moments later, and Naruto was sitting in front of the tub coughing and trying to get the taste of soap out of his mouth. Now I trust you'll be watching your language from now on, right, Naruto? Sasuke Obeiken wasn't asking. Naruto hurriedly nodded his head. Good. Now let's get you cleaned up. Sasuke Obeiken set the soap down and grabbed a towel off the rack. Spitting once more, Naruto made a very crucial mistake. He opened his mouth. That soap tastes like shit, Obeiken. He looked up to find Sasuke Obeiken staring at him. I guess we're going to be here for a while. She deadpanned as she put the towel down and picked back up the soap. Naruto could only whimper. Bar several blocks away. You know, I can't help but feel a little ashamed right now. Atora Master Anbu stated as he huddled around the table with his Kage, fellow Anbu, and his subject's adopted grandfather. Would you rather be back there? With her? His Saru masked comrade asked dryly. Now Saru, don't be too hard on him. It is Tora's first assignment, after all. Sarutobi chided. Takashi interrupted them before they could continue. Gentlemen, please. A moment of silence for my young grandson. Everyone at the table bowed their head for a moment. The silence was broken by the three Anbu chorusing poor bastard, while Sarutobi shook his head sadly. End flashback. Needless to say, he didn't swear around her again. Although, he did try to ask his Ojaizen what the words meant, but he just said the Naruto was too young to understand. Still, he was happy with his new life. Smiling happily, he bounded down the stairs in his pajamas and ran to the kitchen where his Obeiken was making breakfast, and his Ojaizen was reading the paper. Morning! He called as he entered the kitchen. That's good morning, Naruto-chan. Sasuke Obeiken corrected him gently. She laughed quietly while Naruto pouted, before he took his seat at the table. Hey, Ojaizen, are we gonna do some more ninja stuff today? Naruto asked excitedly. Takashi Ojaizen just chuckled good-naturedly. We'll see, Naruto-chan. Maybe after your reading lessons. At that point, Sasuke Obeiken walked up and set a few pills and a glass of orange juice on the table in front of Naruto. He made a face as he looked at the pills. They really were nasty things, and Naruto never failed to half choke on them every time. Before he could open his mouth to complain, his Obeiken sternly told him, Take your vitamins, Naruto. Grumbling, he scooped up the pills and put them in his mouth all at once, not paying attention to the different tastes than usual, before drinking half his glass of juice to wash them down. Black, why do you make me swallow those nasty things, Obeiken? He asked, expecting the usual lecture on how they were good for him, and would help him grow up to be big and strong. So he was surprised when she pleasantly informed him with a smile on her face, Don't worry, Naruto, you won't need them any more after today. Really? He exclaimed, jumping up in his seat. Seeing his grandparents nod, he was about to shout in joy when he suddenly felt a stabbing pain in his chest. Clutching his chest with one hand and coughing uncontrollably into the other, he fell back in his seat before staring at his now blood-covered hand in shock and terror. Oba cough, cough, what's cough hap? He started whimpering before feeling a wave of vertigo pass through him. Still coughing, he fell to the ground, an emotion he hadn't felt in months surging through him. Fear. Reaching desperately for his grandparents, he watched as a look passed through their eyes, a look that he hadn't seen since his beating by that merchant. Complete disgust and satisfaction passed through their eyes as they looked down on him. You know, his Ojaizen started conversationally, calmly folding up his newspaper. It wasn't easy getting Hokage-sama to let us adopt you. His Obeiken spoke next. We really didn't think it would take this long for you to relax around us either. WH cough, why? Naruto asked as tears filled his eyes while a pain that had nothing to do with what they had fed him tore through his chest. Because you deserve to die. Sasuke hissed angrily as she took a threatening step towards him, before halting at a gesture from Takashi. You killed our son, his wife, and our unborn grandchild. And if you're not stopped, you'll do it again. Takashi stated stoically, almost mechanically. So today, we are avenging them and putting an end to your threats simultaneously. What's more is that we'll get away with it too. At this, Sasuke burst into tears, before burying her face in her hands and letting out a wail. Oh Hokage-sama, it's all my fault. She sobbed so hard that even Naruto thought she was telling the truth for a moment, before the pain reminded him of just why he was on the floor. I should have been more careful, I should have checked his vitamins to make sure they weren't tampered with. She sobbed wretchedly, oh my poor little Naruto-chan. And just like that, the tears stopped and her sneer returned. Naruto's vision began to blur as the pain slowly transitioned into a sort of cold numbness. Just as he was about to pass out, however, he felt something change within him. Suddenly, the numbness began to recede as a rush of energy and strength that he never experienced before flowed through him. What's happening? He wondered fearfully. He stumbled to his feet as Takashi and Sasuke gasped at the sight of red chakra beginning to drift off Naruto. Still coughing, he shoved the table with his newfound strength, knocking Sasuke to the floor as he began to run towards the front door, screaming to the best of his ability while the poison still attacked his body. He barely made it 6 steps before Takashi appeared in front of him. Faster than he could react, Takashi backhanded Naruto across the face, breaking his jaw and causing him mind-numbing pain. As Naruto fell to the floor, Takashi kicked him in the side, launching him across the room and through a cabinet. Naruto's flight was stopped when he smashed into the wall hard enough to leave a dent twice the size of his body. As he coughed up even more blood, Takashi advanced on him with wide, almost unseeing eyes. Looking up, he saw Takashi nonchalantly strapping on the claws he had once shown Naruto on his right hand. There were 3 jagged claws, each one about 8 inches long and ended with a cruel-looking barbed tip. You just couldn't make it easy, could you? Half blinded by the pain in his side, Naruto could only watch as Takashi advanced on his quivering body. All you had to do was just die quietly, to accept what needed to be done for the good of the village. Takashi growled in a steadily growing rage. Reaching Naruto, he raised his claws, intending to skewer the young blonde. Just die! He screamed with just a hint of panic. Time seemed to slow down for Naruto as Takashi's claws descended towards him. Fumbling around and grabbing a chunk of broken wood from the cabinet, Naruto instinctively thrusted at Takashi in desperation, trying to fend him off, even as he squeezed his eyes shut in terror. He felt a jerk and then heard Takashi make a surprised sound before the wood was ripped from his hand, followed by a loud thump and Sasuke's scream. Opening his eyes, he saw a gasping and gurgling Takashi almost on top of him, twitching weakly in a rapidly expanding pool of blood. But that wasn't what caught his eye. It was the piece of wood he saw sticking out of Takashi's ribs just before the man suddenly went still. I killed him. What have I done? Before he could think any further, a still screaming Sasuke knocked him back to the ground and began strangling him. You bastard! She screamed in his face, teary eyes wide with despair and hatred. You bastard, just die, you fucking bastard! Naruto tried desperately to pry her hands away from his throat as painful coughs still racked his body. Unable to free himself from the larger and much stronger woman, he began to panic again and desperately looked around through rapidly darkening vision for something, anything that could help him. As he gasped for breath, his gaze landed on Takashi's right arm, or more specifically, the claws that still adorned it. Somehow knowing that his mysterious strength had not yet abandoned him, Naruto reached out and grabbed onto Takashi's wrist, before bringing the elder's fist smashing into the side of Sasuke's head with all of his strength. Unfortunately, he didn't close his eyes this time as he did with Takashi. The sight of the blades passing through her head would be the last thing he saw before passing out from a combination of poison, broken ribs, a severely bruised throat, blood loss and lack of oxygen. And he would carry that sight with him for the rest of his life, the image burned into his head, never to fade or dull with age. Always haunting him. When he bolted awake several hours later, he found himself in a hospital bed. He recognized the room by scent as much as by sight from his rare visits in the past, instantly knowing of only one place that reeked of chemicals and sterile surroundings like this place did. Sighing, he instinctively knew what this meant. It wasn't a nightmare. His grandpa no, the Sonatas had tricked him and tried to murder him. He curled up in a ball, crying out in pain as his ribs shifted painfully. Then he began to cry softly. He had never felt a hurt like this before. Despite what they had done, he had loved them, and they had tried to kill him, and he had killed them. Sobbing, he buried his face in his pillow before freezing in terror as he heard the door open. He didn't stay frozen for long though, as he jumped out of the bed, ripping out an 4 and heart monitor in the process. Once free, he ran as far from the door as he could, staring with wide, terrified eyes at the doorway. Standing there was the old man, who stopped just inside the room and gazed at Naruto with sad eyes. Sarutobi stared at the reports in a seething rage. How could I have been so blind, so naive? This was an unmitigated disaster. An attempted murder of a young child who was also a Jinchuriki, the last known Uzumaki, and the son of the Yondaime Hokage, 2 retired not to mention respected ninja with decades of experience and loyal service to the village, were dead. An Anbu operative who had been a part of Naruto's guard detail was missing, and the child being the only known witness to what happened inside the Sanada house. He sighed as he shifted his eyes to Naruto's medical report. 3 broken ribs, a broken jaw, severe bruising around the throat, consistent with strangulation, severe blood loss, and an undetermined amount of powerful poison. He scanned the report before sighing again. So much for keeping his healing a secret. His ribs were already 2/3 of the way healed, and his jaw was halfway healed according to the last report. Unfortunately, he couldn't be sure if Naruto's healing extended to replenishing his blood, seeing as the doctors hooked him up to a blood packet almost immediately upon arrival. It was the same with the poison, as they had also pumped his stomach. Whether they would have worked so diligently if he hadn't been looking over their shoulders while a pair of Anbu flanked him was debatable. Although it seemed that Usagi's actions 7 months ago had made an impact on the hospital staff, as while there were still grimaces of distaste, most of the staff was nothing but professional when dealing with the young Jinchuriki. Whether they had truly let go of any lingering anger or hatred from the Kyuubi attack or had simply regained control of their emotions, Sarutobi didn't know, but it was an improvement either way. It was apparent, however, that Naruto's healing had at least slowed the poison, since he should have dropped dead within a minute or 2 of ingesting the deadly toxin. Looking over at the autopsy reports for the Sanadas, the causes of death were rather obvious. The wooden shard had punched through Takeshi Sanada's ribs and nearly torn his left lung in half. Then his lungs had rapidly filled with blood, essentially drowning him in his own bodily fluids. Suzuki Sanada, on the other hand, had a 3-bladed claw jammed through the left side of her skull. What was interesting was that the claws had still been strapped to the dead Takeshi's wrist. Add to the fact that Suzuki had been found on top of Naruto with her hands still wrapped around his throat, and one received a very disturbing picture indeed. A picture that Sarutobi desperately didn't want to believe. He didn't want to believe that the elderly couple had had something to do with the attempt on Naruto's life. He also couldn't believe that little Naruto might have played a part in the deaths of his adopted grandparents, despite the splinters embedded in Naruto's hand. No 4-year-old child could have inflicted those injuries to the Sanadas. This meant that either the whole thing was a setup, or that Naruto had somehow accessed its chakra to defend himself. Sarutobi honestly didn't know which would be worse. Sensing the return of one of his Anbu, he angrily barked out report, without looking up from the papers in front of him. The Anbu, who wore an Inu mask, bowed before standing at attention. There is still no sign of Nezumi, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi's grip on the autopsy reports tightened as he nodded for Inu to continue. Without him, we have only the child who has yet to awaken to give us any eyewitness reports as to what happened. Sarutobi finally looked up from the papers and fixed the Anbu member with a hard stare. Have your captain double the search, Inu. He must be found. Utilize the whole Inuzuka clan and the Oinen if you must, but find him. I need answers. Inu bowed once more. It will be done, Hokage-sama. As the Anbu turned to leave, he paused before looking back at Sarutobi with curiosity in his body language. Permission to speak freely, Hokage-sama? Sarutobi glanced at him impatiently. Granted. Inu posed his question. Why don't we just have one of the Yamanakas go through the boy's mind to find what happened? The Anbu almost fainted when Sarutobi leveled an angry glare at him. No. Shaking, the Anbu nonetheless tried to protest, but Hoka. I said no, Sarutobi interrupted. I will not allow someone into Naruto's mind when we have no idea what could happen to the seal, especially since I can't think of a single Yamanaka that I could trust in Naruto's mind. The Anbu just nodded rather than trying to argue further. Find me Nezumi. I'll see if Naruto is up to talking yet. With that, the old Hokage stood and exited the room, leaving a shaken Anbu behind. As Sarutobi walked down the hallways towards Naruto's private room, he couldn't help but wonder about his missing Anbu. Was he somehow involved in what happened, or was he disposed of to prevent interference? And if he was, then who did the disposing? Too many questions and not enough answers. Of course, There was the greatest to him question of all: how would this affect Naruto? Naruto had been paranoid and untrusting for a child while he had been living in the orphanage, only letting down his guard around Sarutobi, and even then only when they were alone. He had always seemed to somehow unconsciously detect any Umbu that had been watching him, which had only increased his paranoia. The fact that Naruto had never spoken up about the neglect he had suffered from his first set of caretakers until that first time Sarutobi had visited without any Umbu spoke volumes. Things had only gotten worse after the Hitode incident. It had taken 3 months of living with the Sonatas before Naruto had truly opened up and trusted anyone other than the Hokage. Once he had, however, his mental state and health had rapidly improved. However, it was that very trust gained from having someone actively care and take interest in him that had allowed Naruto to make that progress. Strip that away, especially in the manner that it had, and there was no telling how Naruto might react. He had seen grown men suffer complete breakdowns from less, and Naruto was only 4 years old. And a Jinchuriki. Specifically, a Jinchuriki with a seal that no one in Konoha was qualified to understand completely. Reaching the door to Naruto's room, Sarutobi lifted up a small prayer for Naruto before opening the door and walking in. He was greeted by an awake and alert Naruto dashing from his bed to the furthest corner from the door. Once Naruto got as far from the door as he could, he turned wide, watery eyes filled with fear on Sarutobi. He flinched inside. "Naruto, I'm so sorry," he thought as he looked at the whimpering and nearly hyperventilating child with sad eyes. Naruto stared at the old man. "Is he gonna kill me? No, he could have done that any time. Besides, he always had me taken care of, but he gave me to the Sonatas, and before that he gave me mean caretakers who always said mean things and locked me out at night, so maybe he does want to hurt me? No, he's the only person that's nice to me." Right. He thought desperately, trying to reassure himself that he could still trust the old man. However, the voice that was born of his paranoia and fear, the one that had kept him alive, kept him safe on so many occasions, spoke up. "What about the Sonatas?" Naruto started at that. "They were nice to me too, and look what they did." Naruto's paranoia jumped several notches at that thought as he tried to push himself further into the wall. Maybe he was just being nice so he can try to hurt me too. If that's the case, but why? Why did the Sonatas, and why would the old man and the villagers, why? His breathing became even faster as his thoughts raced, trying to make some kind of sense out of all this. "Naruto." He jumped as the old man called his name. "Naruto, calm down, you're going to hurt yourself," the Hokage said as he slowly crossed the room towards Naruto. This, of course, was the last thing he should have done, as Naruto's paranoia rose again with a vengeance. Stay away, or I'll make you stop too," he shouted as the Hokage blinked in surprise. Suddenly, a Gamma-masked Umbu ran into the room, kunai drawn, attracted by the sudden shout. Naruto's eyes widened to impossible size, yet his mind was so consumed by fear and paranoia that he failed to see the Hokage calm the Umbu. He also failed to see the Gamma Umbu bow and melt into a corner. However, that didn't stop Naruto from feeling the Umbu watching him. "Where is he?" he shouted at the Hokage, much to the old man's surprise. "It's alright, Naruto, no one is going to hurt you. Just calm down." "You're lying," Naruto interrupted him. "I know he's here, make him come out." Naruto's breathing reached an all-time high as his eyes tried to dart around the room, and keep an eye on the old man at the same time. The old man made a quick signal with his hand, and the feeling of being watched faded. "Alright, Naruto, he's gone. Now you need to calm down before you hurt yourself." Again, the Hokage stepped towards him, reaching out to him. Sadly, Naruto was too far gone in his panic to listen. "No! Stay away from me!" He began to thrash and struggle in the old man's arms, his breathing becoming even more erratic if that was possible. Naruto began to feel dizzy and nauseous, not realizing that his own panic was causing him to hyperventilate. His struggles grew less and less as he began to go limp in the old man's arms. Just as he was about to pass out, the old man did something that, in ordinary times, he never would have done. Something that would change Naruto's life forever and destroy any faith he had in the village. The old man slapped him, and while it succeeded in snapping Naruto out of his panic, it had other, far-reaching consequences. His entire life, cracks had been developing in his outlook of the world. Through all the cruelties and neglect from the orphanage, the coldness of the villagers, and the crushing unending loneliness, the cracks had spread and encompassed more and more of his world. For a time the cracks had begun to close due to the kindness of the old man and the Sonatas, and then they had been brutally torn open again when his adopted grandparents betrayed him. With that slap, the old man, the one person he had left, had shattered his world completely. Naruto stared at the old man in utter shock. The one person who had never hurt him had just hurt him. He didn't understand. Why how come I thought he know he cares about me, I love him, he's my only friend, what I don't, why can't I trust, these thoughts, and more, blurred through his head in a confused jumble that the child could hope to decipher. Desperate for some sense of understanding, some foundation to keep him from crumbling, Naruto latched onto one of his errant thoughts, and held tight until there was nothing left in his mind but that single will. I can't trust anyone, I can't. Yes, that's it. No one could be trusted, not the old man, not the doctors or the ninjas, no one. While Naruto pondered this new truth, his breathing calmed down to somewhat normal levels. Seeing the child calming down somewhat, Sarutobi breathed a sigh of relief. Naruto, the Sandaime began, regaining the child's attention. I'm sorry I hit you, Naruto. Are you alright? Naruto just stared at him blankly. After waiting a minute for an answer, Sarutobi moved a little closer to the silent child. Naruto? Still no answer. Just as he opened his mouth to ask again, he caught a quiet whisper from the small child. I'm fine. Somewhat relieved, Sarutobi carefully picked up the now unresisting child and carried him back to the bed before calling a nurse to hook him back up to the floor. He watched Naruto as he just stared at the nurse, and while he didn't resist when she took his arm and inserted a fresh four, there was a tenseness to him. Sarutobi couldn't help but be reminded of a wild animal backed into a corner, frozen yet ready to burst into movement at a moment's notice. Once the nurse finished and left the room again, Sarutobi sat next to the bed and began to question him. Naruto, he began gently. I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me what happened yesterday. He was met by silence. Naruto, please. I need to know what happened to Takashi and Sasuke. He watched as Naruto hugged his knees to his chest and just stared at him. Misunderstanding the child's silence, he tried to reassure the boy. It's okay, Naruto, you can talk to me. What happened? More silence and staring was all he received from the small blonde. Just as he was about to try again, he caught a faint whisper, so quiet he might have missed it if he hadn't been watching Naruto so intently. They hurt me and I made them stop, were the soft-spoken words from the eerily quiet child. Sarutobi barely held in a wince, before pressing for more information. How did they hurt you, Naruto? He asked gently. He received the same silence and staring as before, though Naruto answered a little quicker than the last time. Put stuff in my vitamins, said I hurt people hit me. His hand rose to the large bruise adorning his face when he said the last one, all in that quiet, soft-spoken way. Sarutobi managed to keep his face a mask of gentle understanding, despite the rage and anger, as well as the sadness and regret that warred beneath the surface. I'm so sorry, Naruto, but I need to ask, was anyone else involved? Did you see anyone else? Did anything about that day seem unusual? Did anything out of the ordinary happen? Naruto seemed to think for a minute, giving Sarutobi a weighing look before whispering. It was gone. This caught his attention. It, Naruto? What do you mean? What is it? Naruto just stared at him. I dunno, I just feel it except when I woke up. Sarutobi frowned. Can you describe it, Naruto? What exactly do you feel? The child seemed to think it over for a moment. I dunno, kinda like somebody is staring at you really hard. I wonder, so you feel like someone is watching you? A shrug was the only answer Sarutobi received, so he decided to test his theory. Tell me, Naruto, did you feel this watcher just now? If Naruto could sense the Umbu just now, who's to say he couldn't sense his normal Umbu detail? They were instructed to stay out of sight and avoid direct contact with him. With Naruto's enhanced senses, perhaps he had always been subconsciously aware of the Umbu? He focused on Naruto again as the child answered him. Uh-huh. How long have you felt this watcher, Naruto? Sarutobi asked. Naruto just blinked olishly at him and whispered with a shrug. All the time. Interesting. Such a skill could serve him well later in life, although it would also make his surveillance even harder. And it certainly wouldn't help with the child's paranoia. Based on what Naruto was saying, Nezumi hadn't been there when he had woken up. However, Tora confirmed that Nezumi had shown up for his guard shift. And he knew for a fact that Sasuke never let Naruto sleep past 7:30. That meant that whatever had happened to Nezumi occurred between 6 and 7:30, assuming Tora was telling the truth and wasn't involved himself. Why can nothing be simple? He sighed mentally. Seeing Naruto lapse back into silence, Sarutobi decided the poor boy could use some sleep and that they should finish the interview in the morning. Alright, Naruto, the nurse is going to give you something to help you sleep now, and we'll talk more in the morning, okay? He was answered with silence, and that look again. As he carefully moved Naruto to a lying down position and lowered the bed, Sarutobi couldn't help but feel a bit uncomfortable about Naruto's seemingly unending silence. Sighing to himself again, he called for the nurse and watched as she checked Naruto's chart before injecting a light sedative into the four, while speaking in a generic polite tone. Alright Sanada-san, you're going to feel a little sleepy, but don't worry, it's just the Uzumaki. There was that whisper again. Both the nurse and Sarutobi looked in surprise at Naruto, who was staring at the ceiling now, seemingly ignoring the other occupants of the room. The nurse looked to him uncertainly to make sure she wasn't hearing things. Sarutobi just nodded, keeping his eyes on Naruto. Understanding his nod, the nurse looked back to the child. I'm sorry, Sanada-san, what was that? Sarutobi listened intently for Naruto's answer. My name is Uzumaki, not Sanada. He all but hissed that last word. Oh dear. Sarutobi thought worriedly as he tried to run damage control. Naruto, why don't you get some rest, and we can talk about it more in the morning? He smiled gently at the young blonde who continued to stare at the ceiling, not even glancing at him. Seeing the nurse frown at the child for seemingly ignoring the village's leader, Sarutobi cleared his throat to get her attention. I trust that there is nothing else. The nurse smiled and bowed respectfully. No, Hokage-sama, I'm finished here. Very well. Sarutobi stood from his chair, trying to keep his back from cracking audibly. I'll see you in the morning, Naruto, alright? Once again, he was met with that unnatural silence. Sighing, Sarutobi beckoned the nurse out of the room and closed the door. Walking a short distance from the room, Sarutobi stopped and addressed the seemingly empty hallway. Gamma, I want you to stand guard over Naruto until I return. As you will, Hokage-sama, came a soft voice from the shadows. Make no mistake, Gamma. If anything happens to him on your watch, I will hold you personally responsible. Do I make myself clear? Hi, Hokage-sama. Nodding, Sarutobi continued down the hallway and left the hospital. Hopefully a night's rest will help Naruto return to normal. However, this whole situation makes me uneasy. Never has an assassination attempt come so close before. With the exception of the Hitode incident, every attack before this was thwarted without Naruto even being aware of them. Where are you, Nezumi? Growling at the course of his thoughts, Sarutobi headed back to his office, expecting a long night. Naruto was lost in thought as he lay on the bed, staring sightlessly at the white ceiling of his hospital room. Why is everybody wanna hurt me? What'd I ever do to them? Rolling onto his right side, he felt a tug on the needle in his arm, causing a stinging pain that was largely overridden by the throbbing of his ribs. Aoi! He whimpered as he rolled back to his left and gazed at the needle. I wonder when the nurse is gonna give me that sleep thingy. All she did was put that needle in that tube. Stupid tube, he thought as he frowned at the painful thing stuck in his arm. I don't see why I have to have this stupid thing anyway, I'm not even thirsty. That was the reason the old man said he had to have it the first time he came to the hospital. 1. I still don't get how I drink this stuff with my arm anyway. Wait a minute, she put stuff in the tube and my arm drinks out of the tube so. Suddenly, the Sonatas and their vitamins flashed through his mind, along with everything else they had done. Gripped by terror and paranoia, Naruto just barely stopped himself from screaming in sheer terror as he ripped the needle out of his arm, gasping in pain as he did so. Sniffing as tears filled his eyes, Naruto grasped the crook of his arm while his blood flowed out onto the bed. Rolling back onto his right side and curling up into a ball, Naruto quietly cried into his knees. He cried for the Sonatas, the couple that he had loved as his grandparents. Despite what they had done to him, he had loved them with everything his little heart could muster. They, and to a slightly lesser extent the old man, had been his world. Without them, he was lost and alone in the world once more. Never again would he run to the table for breakfast and call morning to his family. Never again would he practice throwing kunai and leaf floating with his Ojizen. Never again would he sit on his Obacon's lap and read his storybooks with her. He thought he had been alone before the Sonatas. However, having lived with them for the last 6 months, having been a part of their family, had shown him just what his life was missing, and losing them taught him exactly what it was to be truly alone. The sadness and fear at being alone in a world that gave him nothing but pain overwhelmed him, and Naruto sobbed himself into a restless, nightmare-ridden sleep. Naruto-chan. Breakfast is ready, echoed up the stairs. Coming, Naruto called back as he ran down to the kitchen. As he ran to his place at the table, he looked to his Ojizen who was hidden behind the morning newspaper. Hey Ojizen, looky, I can make the leaf float. Naruto grabbed a leaf. Weirdo Bacon never lets dirt and leaves in the house and proceeded to make it spin just above the palm of his hand. Very good, Naruto. His Obacon's voice reached him as she wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind. Smiling with pride, Naruto tried to turn around to return the hug, but she squeezed even tighter, stopping him. In fact, Her grip started to become uncomfortable as it became difficult to breathe. "Oh Bacon, you're hugging so tight, I can't breathe." Oh Bacon, gasping, Naruto began to pull at her arms, trying to get some breathing room. Feeling his Ojaizen approach and ruffle his hair, Naruto looked up for assistance, only to be greeted by a horrifying sight. There in front of him was his Ojaizen, blood pouring out of a gaping hole in his chest. Trying to scream, Naruto's struggles increased to where he could finally see his Bacon. He immediately wished he hadn't. Smiling down at him, seemingly unaware of the 3 blades protruding from the side of her head, she spoke again. "You'll make a fine demon someday, Naruto." Naruto went cold at these words. As his struggles grew weaker and weaker from the lack of air, Naruto barely heard his Ojaizen gurgle. "Here Naruto, this will help you on your way to becoming a great demon of Konoha." Weakly raising his eyes to his Ojaizen, Naruto watched in horror as Takashi pulled a kitchen knife from seemingly nowhere. As the elderly man drove the blade into Naruto's chest, he let out a terrified scream. Jerking awake, Naruto opened his mouth to scream and was surprised for a fraction of a second when nothing came out. However, once that passed, he realized why. Standing over his bed with their hands wrapped around his throat, was a shadowy figure. Naruto could just make out a pair of grayish bracers on the figure's forearms and a part of a vest, but nothing else, as even the greatest eyesight was useless when the owner of said eyesight was too panicked to take in what he was seeing. As Naruto thrashed around in a desperate attempt to free himself, the figure shifted to keep a better grip, bringing a portion of his face into view. Or it would have, if they weren't wearing a very familiar white porcelain mask. Umbu. But why? Shocked by what he saw, Naruto froze up, nearly sealing his fate. Luckily, during his struggles, Naruto had somehow managed to tangle the 4 tube around his leg, and his last kick was just enough to bring the 4 stand crashing to the ground. Mere seconds after the stand hit the ground, the door to Naruto's room burst open and a second Umbu dashed into the room. Not even slowing, the new Umbu jumped into the air towards Naruto's bed, drawing his ninjutsu as he did so. As he landed on the side of the bed, the Umbu swung his blade at Naruto's assailant, forcing the attacker to release Naruto and defend himself. Naruto's assailant drew 2 kunai and crossed them to block the powerful down swing of the ninjutsu, before jumping back to gain some room. Naruto's savior leapt forward almost immediately after the attacker disengaged, landing on the floor between Naruto and the man, creating a barrier of deadly steel. "Stand aside, little tadpole," the assassin growled as he raised his kunai to a ready position. "You're not getting any closer to this child, you washed-up rodent," said Tadpole responded while lazily twirling his sword one-handed. He said it like he was merely stating a fact instead of threatening the man's life. As Naruto shakily gasped in fear, not to mention a desperate need for oxygen, he was finally able to get a good look at both his attacker and his savior. While he gazed at the two, time seemed to slow, and Naruto couldn't help but feel like he was but a spectator, uninvolved in the entire event. He knew he should be scared or angry or something, but he just felt empty. He also knew that he should run, but really, how far could he get? As he had thought, rodent, his attacker was indeed an Umbu. He was dressed in the standard black pants and sleeveless shirt. Over that, he wore the grayish vest with the standard ninjutsu sword rising over the right shoulder. He also had the forearm bracer/sleeves and shin guards. The other Umbu, Tadpole, was dressed almost the same, with the only difference being hair color and masks. Naruto's attacker had brown hair and wore a Nezumi mask, while the other had black hair and wore a Gamma mask. Gamma was also slightly taller than Nezumi. Naruto took all this in an instant, before the duo continued their dance of death. Gamma swung his ninjutsu at Nezumi, only to stop mid-strike and thrust at the man's chest. Nezumi cursed, caught off guard with his kunai position to block a side swing, leaving his chest exposed. He barely managed to bring one kunai back in time to deflect Gamma's blade, hissing as he received a scratch just below his armpit instead of being run through the chest. The moves were so simple and smooth, as if the two Umbu had practiced this dance for weeks beforehand. Only the grunts and cursing broke the flow from one step to another. The rogue Umbu angrily threw himself forward, trying to get inside the sword-wielding Umbu's guard. Thrusting one of his kunai forward, Nezumi managed to drive Naruto's guardian back against the wall before jamming his second kunai into Gamma's chest. Gamma gasped in pain and Naruto felt the beginnings of terror when his only protector was killed right in front of him, before the Umbu disappeared in a puff of smoke. Snarling savagely when the Umbu turned into a bedpan, Nezumi spun around slashing with his kunai as he went. There was a loud clang as kunai met ninjutsu. Grunting, Nezumi allowed himself to fall back against the wall before twisting his torso to the side, drawing Gamma's blade out to the right, creating an opening, and viciously kicking him in the chest. Naruto blinked in surprise when Gamma held his sword out and seemingly disappeared. An instant later, Naruto was alerted by a crunching sound. Turning, Naruto found his protector slumped against the wall. Naruto's eyes widened in fear at this sight, silently pleading with the man to get up, to save him. As the sword user crashed into the opposite wall, Nezumi threw his kunai, one after the other, hiding the second in the shadow of the first. Gamma was able to knock the first kunai away with his ninjutsu, only to gasp in surprise when the second impaled his shoulder. As Gamma dropped his blade, Nezumi grinned under his mask and took advantage of the brief lull in the fighting. A second later, he was standing in front of the corner Naruto had retreated to. Arm whipping forward, he grabbed Naruto by the throat and drew another kunai to drive into Naruto's heart. Naruto struggled weakly in his grip, choking and sputtering as his ribs protested in agony. Please don't, I don't want to die. Just as the Umbu was about to finish his task, Gamma appeared behind him, desperately driving a kunai through the side of his neck, killing Nezumi instantly and spraying Naruto's face with blood. Naruto wasn't sure how long he just sat there staring at the dead man, but when he finally became aware of his surroundings again, the Gamma masked Umbu was crouching in front of him. I said, "Are you alright, kid?" Gamma asked, shaking Naruto by the shoulder. Naruto stared at the man who had saved him, mind abuzz with questions. What does he care? Why did he even bother saving me? Is this just another trick? Do they really think I'll fall for this so easy? Seeing the Umbu reaching out to shake him again, Naruto finally spoke. Don't touch me. You're welcome. Gamma grunted as he stood up and called for the doctors. It was then that Naruto noticed that the Umbu had wrapped some bandages around his arm where he had been hurt. What really caught his eye, though, was that the other Umbu was missing. There was still a pool of blood where he died, but no sign of the body. Guess I spaced out for a while, Naruto thought just before the room was swarmed with nurses and doctors. Trying to avoid notice, Naruto shrank back into the corner, praying to be overlooked long enough to sneak out the door. Sadly, he was immediately noticed by the first nurse to enter the room. Sanada-san, the young nurse called out, much to Naruto's irritation. She rushed over to him, quickly followed by several other nurses and a doctor. Kneeling in front of him, she went through a series of hand seals before moving her hand in a sweeping motion over Naruto. How is he, Kaori? A doctor asked as he crouched down next to the young nurse. He has some bruising around his neck, and it looks like he tore out his forearm. Other than that, he seems to be alright, though I'm worried he might be in shock, Kaori reported as she finished her scan. The doctor nodded his head and addressed the nurses around him. Alright, let's get him cleaned up and moved to a new room. I'll send word to the Hokage. After receiving some nods, he moved to check on the Umbu before leaving. Naruto tensed as another one of the nurses moved to pick him up. He wasn't sure if she noticed or not, though the other nurse, Kaori, seemed to be looking at him sadly. As he was carried from the room, he saw the Umbu following him with Kaori hounding him every step of the way. What happened in here? What did you do to that poor boy? Don't ignore me. I'm talking to you. I swear if you had anything to do with this, not even the Hokage can protect you. Kaori growled at Gamma as he followed Naruto out the room. Wow, he's really good at ignoring her. I wonder why he isn't being nice to her like Obake always sighed. Naruto flinched when he realized where his train of thought was taking him. The nurse must have felt him, because she stopped and asked, Are you alright, Sanada-san? Stop calling me that, he hissed at her. Okay then, Naruto-san. Are you alright? The nurse seemed completely calm despite his outburst. I'm fine, he muttered as he looked away from her so she wouldn't see his eyes starting to water. He chided himself as he scrubbed at his eyes angrily. Boys shouldn't cry, ninjas don't cry, why should I cry for them? I won't ever cry again, I won't. Despite his best efforts, the tears continued to drip down his face. Naruto kept his head turned away from the nurse as she laid him in a fresh bed and tucked him in while another sat up in four and put the needle in his arm. Shortly after, the doctor came in, checked on a few things, and passed his hand over Naruto, pausing for a moment at his neck, before writing something on a clipboard attached to the bed and leaving the room. Naruto waited until the last nurse Kaori was it? Left the room with instructions to call if he needed anything, before he pulled the needle from his arm once more. Sitting up, Naruto wrapped his arms around his legs, uncaring of the blood that flowed down his arm once again. Staring around the room, Naruto checked each nook and cranny that he thought might be hiding someone. Seeing no one, and more importantly, feeling no one, Naruto began to relax back into the bed before freezing in horror. Slowly inching to the side of the bed, Naruto held his breath as he began to cautiously poke his head under the bed, his heart pounding loudly in his ears. Thump thump. Naruto carefully gripped the side of the bed, making sure to keep his fingers from poking over the side. Thump thump. Holding his breath, Naruto slowly moved his head towards the edge. Thump thump. Freezing right at the edge, Naruto tried to force himself to peek down under the bed. Thump thump. Come on, just look, just a couple of inches, that's all. Just as Naruto was about to peek his head around those last few inches, he couldn't hold his breath any longer. Ha! Naruto gasped out before going wide-eyed and clapping his hands around his mouth. No longer having hands to hold himself up over the edge, gravity did what it does best. Landing on his head with an oomph, Naruto curled up into a ball and squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for his doom. When nothing happened after a few moments, Naruto slowly opened one eye. His gaze darted under the bed and revealed nothing. Breathing a sigh of relief, Naruto sprawled out on his back. Staring up at the ceiling, Naruto quickly became lost in his thoughts. Now that his Jiraiya guardians were dead, he was alone again, meaning that he would probably be sent back to the orphanage. The question was, did he want to?